talked about probably a little bit of serendipity for Brigham Young this year, having a very simplistic start to their season. Probably not going to learn a lot about them until we see them play Utah down in Provo. They've got a really easy start to the season. They've already dispatched of Portland State and Stanford very easily. They'll be on the road next week at East Carolina, and then they'll be in Boulder at Colorado. Colorado, one of the worst teams in the Big 12, so is West Virginia. I think at Arizona will be an interesting. I'm still kind of waiting to learn a little bit more about Arizona. Of course, they've got a good quarterback under center. And then we're all already looking forward to that game down in Provo, where both Utah and BYU, in my opinion, have a real shot at being 6-0 prior to that matchup. Now, for Utah, not as fortunate. CBS Sports believe Utah has the hardest schedule in the Big 12 this year. Of course, already UCLA and Cal Poly. Go to 7,000-plus feet elevation to take on a Wyoming Cowboy team they should handle pretty well. And then Texas Tech rolls into town. Fox Big Noon kickoff rolls into town coming up 2 weeks from a week from Saturday, week and a half from right now. It's a 10 a.m. kick. I know a lot of you aren't juiced about that. But it'll be fun to have Fox Big Noon kickoff here. We are efforting Joel Klatt. We are efforting Gus Johnson. Gus has been on the show a number of times, good friend of the program, so we'll see what we can do there. The Big 12 continues to take shot after shot from a lot of people who don't believe this conference is any good this year. Big 12 slate will get going on Friday. I believe the K-State-Arizona game is not a conference matchup. I believe that was scheduled when Arizona was a member of the Pac-12, but Colorado and Houston will do battle. Houston's offense looks better than it did a year ago. Colorado's going to make a change at quarterback. We'll inform you what that is. And then not a lot of great non-con Big 12 opportunities. Those opportunities have been presented over the past couple of weeks and unfortunately have not been capitalized upon by most of the Big 12 teams. So as we have already mentioned, and of course we'll talk about a lot throughout the rest of the week, Utah, Wyoming, Baylor welcomes in Samford. Texas Tech welcomes in Olympian Oregon State Beaver team. It'll be West Virginia Pitt. Cincinnati, who I still think might be in this thing, they're going to take on Northwestern State. Iowa State is clean. They're 3-0. They probably have the best resume in the Big 12. They're going to be in Jonesboro, Arkansas, to take on Arkansas State. Abilene Christian against TCU, and then Texas State, Arizona State. So a lot of dog games in the Big 12. And, of course, I'm the guy that bitches about the schedule all the time, and I will continue to because these games are horrible for the consumer. Now, speaking of the consumer, new data through the course of 3 weeks of college football from our friends at Sports Media Watch indicate that college football ratings up 25% year over year. And so far, that would be the third straight year of heightened consumption. Transfer portal, NIL, they have not injured the sport. And we've had a lot of really good early season matchups. We have a decent slate as far as the national big picture goes. We'll see if Oregon can keep their momentum going. They're on the road at Northwestern. And we've got a couple of other games we're kind of keeping an eye on. Bama bounced back last week. They welcome in Wisconsin to Tuscaloosa. Probably the biggest game in Knoxville. It's going to be Georgia and Tennessee. And, we'll go from there. South Florida looks to continue their hot start to the season. They're down taking on Miami. And then the world's largest cocktail party, LSU's off to a good start to the season. Florida limping a little bit. But down in Baton Rouge, a big college football rivalry, Florida taking on LSU. A&M is in South Bend to take on Notre Dame. So some pretty good national college football games, but kind of a quiet weekend concerning the Big 12 and, of course, Utah football, high-speed head to Laramie. So we'll get you ready for the game. We'll talk a lot of college and pro football in the program today. Not a lot of news outside of that. Mauricio Pochettino's side actually looked pretty decent with a 2-0 win over Japan. Diego Luna, RSL's star midfielder, came off the bench and played in the second half and looked solid. Team looked good. It was probably the best performance we've seen from the U.S. men's national team. As we are 9 months away from the World Cup that will be hosted, of course, in our region. RSL will be back at it coming up on Saturday at 7:30 against Sporting KC. Hockey fans, are you ready? Today's a big day. Rookies have reported for the Utah Mammoth. Coach Torney is doing some media rounds, better known as Bear. And then we are, I believe, 5 days away from the vets reporting. The odds came out yesterday for playoffs in the world of the National Hockey League, and the Utah Hockey Club is favored to make it this year. Oh, I called them the Utah Hockey Club. The Utah Mammoth is actually favored to make the playoffs this year. So there you go. More betting allegations in the world of pro and college basketball. There's a lot of noise around this Kawhi Leonard situation, but not a lot of stuff going on in the NBA right now. So our coverage is pretty football-centric. And during the football seasons on Wednesday, we typically turn our attention to looking ahead as opposed to continuing to looking back on what happened last weekend in the world of pro and college football. So we will do that on the show today. Our first guest live in studio, Richard Smith. 40 years with Utah Jazz. We'll kind of bounce around and do a little bit of everything with Smitty today. The voice of the Utes is Bill Riley. He stops by the program. Danny Cannell, one of the loudest college football voices and a good friend of the show, will stop by. RSL midfielder Johnny Russell will join us later on. And then we will go from there on this Wednesday show. Richard Smith, Bill Riley, Danny Cannell, Johnny Russell, me, Spence Checketts, all of you, the great listeners. And that guy, Porter Larson, on a Wednesday of Porter Larson Bowl Week, where Utah is headed up to Laramie. Do you just continue to get more giddy and giddy and giddy as if you feel you're like a kid waiting for Christmas, waiting for Santa on Saturday?
Seeing a top 20 team play football in Laramie, Wyoming? What? Where else would you rather be? Where on this earth would you rather be?
Well, don't ask me. We need to ask you. That's why it's the Porter Larson Bowl.
There's nowhere. There's nowhere I'd rather be. So, yeah, looking forward to it. A little giddy, as you said, heading into, 48-hour rule tomorrow, and then we'll be off to Laramie on Friday and watching some football, man. It's listen, I think we know what to expect from the matchup. This is a team that Utah should beat by a couple scores, maybe 3. But who knows what happens with the weather, with the stuff out there. Just don't look ahead too much. Texas Tech's going to be fun, looking ahead to that matchup, but got to take care of business in Wyoming first.
Yep, no doubt. So looking forward to hopefully a fun, anxiety-free trip to Laramie. If you missed our conversation yesterday with the voice of the Cowboys, really good guy, and ultimately he gave you a bunch of recommendations of places you go grab a beer, go grab a steak, go grab some food. If you are making the trek to Laramie, of course, with the new reality of Utah football being in the Big 12, some of the road trips are not as convenient as they once were. Although this year you've got 3 pretty decent options. If you made it down to Southern Cal for the Rose Bowl, that's a fun little road trip. Laramie just a few hours away. And, of course, BYU will host Utah, so a little 40-mile jaunt down south. You could do worse than that. All right, our first guest today, Smitty's going to join us. I always enjoy my conversations with the legend himself. But on this Wednesday afternoon, before Smitty stops by, courtesy of our good friends and your good friends, too, at Prize Picks, it's time now for your opening tip.
Welcome to The Drive with Spence Checketts on Utah's #1 sports talk. Now into the studios of ESPN 700 to set the scene for the show. The opening tip of The Drive is brought to you by Prize Picks. Use the code ESPN 700 and run your game with Prize Picks.
All right, kids, listen up. You hear this? You hear that? That's me tapping the papers against the microphone because I have good news for you. Prize Picks is essentially hooking you up with easy wins to start the season. So as I always say, you should definitely go get their free money and then capitalize on their promotions, make a little cash, and then go from there and see if you like the platform. I utilize it. It's a lot of fun. I'll tell you my Thursday night Prize Picks, football picks coming up tomorrow. But step number 1 is you download the Prize Picks app today from the App Store, the Google Play Store. It's free. So just search Prize Picks, download that app. Then you use the promo code ESPN700, and they're going to hook you up with $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's promo code ESPN700 to get $50 in lineups after you play that first $5 lineup on Prize Picks. It is good to be right. And they're offering what they're calling a max discount for the first couple of weeks of the NFL season. They already gave you Dak Prescott 0.5 passing yards. They also gave you Lamar Jackson 0.5 passing yards. This weekend, Super Bowl rematch, Chiefs-Eagles. Travis Kelce, 0.5 passing yards. Kelce catches 1 pass for 1 yard, and you win. So utilize that. You pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. You can win up to 2,000 times your cash. On Prize Picks, it is good to be right. It's also good to be right in the world of college football. And I was thinking about this, listening to a little recap of what we saw during week 2 when it came to a couple of the marquee matchups that we saw. Ton of eyes. And I referenced this earlier. Sports Media Watch came out today with the ratings for the first 3 weeks of college football. They are up 25% year over year. That is the third straight year, at least so far, that college football has seen an increase in consumption. So I think there's a tremendous amount of issues when it comes to the business of the sport that still need to be solved. I think there are a tremendous amount of scheduling issues that it is beyond me why they haven't been able to sit down and have scheduling uniformity. So some of these early season matchups are just pathetic. I mean, Florida State beat East Texas A&M 77-3 last week. Like, what are we even doing? What's the point? My old radio partner, Gordon Monson, used to call this essentially prostitution was the term he would use. It's a wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. You go up there, you get rocked, then you take a check home. And from the consumer point of view, it's just beyond boring. I don't know who's watching these games. Now, the widespread acceptance and leaning into legalized gambling has benefited sports overall, has benefited live sports overall. I think it's a little bit of a slippery slope. I've already talked about this on the program before, and we saw a couple of other stories today about college basketball players and Malik Beasley in the NBA being investigated for their role in potentially fixing games to make some money on the side through gambling outlets. This is not anything that I think should have been, accepted widespread. I understand the revenue streams, and I understand the desire for more money if you're running a business. But at what point are you sacrificing the integrity of your product? At what point are you sacrificing the integrity of your business just in the name of a couple of other $100 million when you don't really need it? Right? Like, it kind of reminds me of the conversation we have about the expanded CFP when the Big Ten was kind of like, hey, let's go to like 28 teams or whatever. Yes, I understand your premise. I understand more content means more attention. And I understand we live in an attention economy now, which I also think is problematic. But hey, I'm just a guy with a sports talk radio show. And I get that more games means more revenue, more ad revenue, more live TV revenue. I understand that. But there is a point where enough is enough. There is. And with some of these early season games, they've just been brutal because it's an unfair fight. And oftentimes it makes for a really bad watch. But they were breaking down Oklahoma, Michigan today on College Football Live. And Oklahoma has a really, really good football team. And they've got a really, really good quarterback who played at Washington State last year, who right now has to be considered one of the top 3 or 4 favorites to win the Heisman. This John Mateer kid's a really good player. He can throw it. He can run it. He's big. He's athletic. They're good in the trenches. But Michigan has this wonderkins freshman, Bryce Underwood, who initially was not – he's a Michigan kid. He's from the state. I believe he was going to LSU, if I remember correctly. That was his initial commit. And then when Michigan realized they were going to lose McCarthy, the Michigan alumni got together, the boosters got together, and they paid Bryce Underwood a lot of money to play football in Ann Arbor. And he's thought to be the next generational quarterback, not just for Michigan, but in the Big Ten, and maybe in a couple of years, the best quarterback in the country. And you can tell there's some intoxicating talent there with the kid. If you just watch him, Michigan's played a couple of games already. But Oklahoma's defensive coordinator is Brent Venables, who's one of the most well-respected defensive coordinators in all of college football. And what Brent Venables and Oklahoma's defense that was thought to be their Achilles heel this year did to Bryce Underwood last week as Oklahoma took care of Michigan relatively easily, 24-13. It made me think about the dynamic of Morgan Scalley as a defensive coordinator and what he should be able to do when Utah and BYU play. And yes, there are plenty of games between now and then. I do believe, as I said to open the show, BYU has almost a comically easy start, not just to their schedule overall, but their Big 12 schedule, the way it starts. They should be 6-0 before Utah rolls down to Provo. ESPN's FPI has them heavily favored in the rest of their games prior to the Utah-BYU game down in Provo in October. It's East Carolina on the road, 80% chance to win that. Colorado and Boulder, 72% chance to win that. West Virginia at home, 87% chance to win that. And then down in Tucson against Arizona, 68% to win that game. So I do think there's an excellent chance that BYU is 6-0 before Utah rolls into Provo. I think there is a chance that Utah is in the same place. Now, again, the problem of a very weak non-con slate, because it's not just BYU. Utah has a weak non-con slate as well. And as I said yesterday, it's not BYU's fault that Stanford stinks. Stanford, once upon a time under David Shaw, was a really, really good program. You scheduled this game a number of years ago. You have no idea there's going to be this massive shift with coaching changes, and Troy Taylor's gone, and Frank Reich is in as an interim. Andrew Luck is the GM trying to get that turned around, but they don't have very good players. They were okay on defense. The physicality up front I thought was fine. But the truth of the matter is BYU's offense was put in great positions by their defense over and over and over and didn't capitalize enough. Was the game ever in doubt? No. I never thought Stanford was going to be close. BYU covered easily. And BYU, in the same way Utah is built, has this really stout defense that's going to keep them in a bunch of games. And I didn't believe that the Jake Retzlaff news was anything that should cause you to summarily dismiss BYU as a contender this year in the Big 12. But when you name a true freshman to that position, the most important position in sports, you're probably just acknowledging that at some point along the way, he's going to get got somehow. And BYU fans remember the Kansas game a year ago. Everybody talks about the Arizona State game. It was the Kansas game in Provo that turned out to be the thing that really got them and derailed what could have been a special season. And for Utah, I will say I think there is a chance they're 6-0, but Utah has Tech. We need to learn more about Texas Tech, but if you've seen the highlights, from them against subpar competition, again, back to the problem of the early season in college football where these matchups are just unfair fights and it makes it impossible to know what's real. But they look pretty overwhelming so far, again, against two teams that are really, really bad. I'll be interested to see what the line is. It'll come out after this week's game where Utah's taking on Wyoming. But Texas Tech, whether it's here or there, no matter what, neutral field, that's a tough ask. Utah should be able to handle West Virginia. Initially, the Arizona State game here in Salt Lake looked like it would be a tough task, and maybe it still will be. I'm not one that summarily dismisses one team after 1 or 2 weeks. Again, observation, not conclusion, is what we talk about on the show quite a bit. But what it comes down to when we do the way too early preview of this stuff, which I don't do all the time, but we're kind of leaning into it at this point, Morgan Scalley has to be looking at the opportunity as a defensive coordinator and licking his chops with a true freshman on the other side. And if you're a BYU fan, just like Michigan fans experienced a week ago with Brett Venables in Oklahoma, the one thing that really scares you about Utah coming down to Provo is what Morgan could potentially do against a true freshman quarterback that at that point will have 6 games under his belt. But I've heard players say this over and over and over through the years. Really doesn't matter how much experience you have. You're not prepared for a Utah-BYU football game unless you've actually played in it. And, of course, Devin Dampier hasn't played in it either, right? But Devin is a seasoned college football vet, while Bear Bachmeier is a true freshman that still has a big learning curve in front of him. But it's exciting to have both these teams off to good starts, and it's fun to already be able to look ahead to a game in a number of weeks with a lot of optimism. With Utah and BYU football off to a really good start. All right, coming up on the other side, we'll catch a quick break on a Wednesday drive. We're going to catch up with the great Richard Smith. All right, got some breaking news, some more bad news for the Niners. Kyle Shanahan has said Brock Purdy can now miss, quote, multiple weeks with a left shoulder and a toe injury. This follows the news yesterday that George Kittle is headed to the IR. So we have week 2 of the NFL getting going tomorrow with some Thursday night football. Of course, high speed ahead of the weekend ahead in college football. Our next guest, one of our favorites, live in studio after I stole his iPad. But it has been returned. Let's get Smitty's mic on if we could. The great Richard Smith, live in studio for an entire hour. Smitty, happy Wednesday, sir. How are you?
Spence, it's good to see you, and I appreciate you returning. I know all of the secrets that I had on that iPad from all of the years of my work in the NBA, that you didn't go through it. I know you didn't take both of those secrets off there, and so I appreciate that. But you know what? My iPad is probably worth about $2.50 if you're looking at any relevant information that anybody would want to get off of it. So.
No, when I opened it up, I searched for a Raul Lopez scouting report.
There you go.
That was the first one I wanted to see.
Hey, you know what you would have found, though?
What's
Seriously,
that?
You would have found a note on here that I sent to Bart Taylor, who's now the Vice President Player Personnel for the Jazz back when he was a new guy with the Jazz in 2014, and Bart was helping us set up our database scouting efforts and stuff at the time. And I sent him a note, and I said, "Hey Bart, can you make a file on this young 14-year-old playing in Madrid on the youth team? His name is Luka Doncic." And he's from Slovenia, but he just joined the youth program in Madrid, and I'm watching him play in this under-18 tournament, European tournament for the Real Madrid youth team. And as a 14-year-old, he's playing with 17, 18-year-olds, and he's the guy running the show. So we need to make a file on him and start following this guy because, you know, there may be something we need to keep track of and follow up on as appropriate and all that kind of stuff. And that's one of those, Spence, we've had hundreds and hundreds of those over the years, and most of them obviously don't pan out, and guys plateau out, or they get injured, or something happens, or they're better at age 16 than they are at age 22 or whatever. But Doncic was one of those guys who you could see early on was had a special feel and touch on the floor, and just kind of knew what was going on. And as his body matured and he grew into it, you know, they moved him up, you know, from the youth team when he was 17 onto the main team. And the main team is one of the big programs and powerhouse programs in Europe. And he ended up becoming the MVP of the EuroLeague Final Four and MVP of the EuroLeague when he was 18 and 19. And obviously we know what he's been doing in the NBA the last 6-7 years.
So I wanted to ask you, before we get into some of the other stuff I have today, there's an interesting dynamic going on with the way Kalani has built BYU football and kind of best practices with the way Kyle kind of built some of that stuff up. But we talked about this last weekend. You were so good to give us perspective on Coach Mack. So Coach Mack honored at Utah's game over the weekend at halftime. He goes into the Ring of Honor, second inductee to Alex Smith, who was in last week. And I just had a chance to say hello to him very quickly. It was a big day for him. He had his Hawaiian lei on. He looked like he was having a good time, but a lot of people wanted a little bit of Coach Mack, so I just went over and shook his hand and said hello. But he looked really touched. Like it looked like it genuinely meant a lot to him, which was nice for me to see.
It meant a lot to him and his family, Spence. And I actually talked to his lovely wife, Vicky, earlier today, and I was asking her, hey, how do you think everything went on Saturday? And she said, oh, it was so great. And, you know, Mac was so touched and was emotionally draining because of not just of the honor, but of all the people that showed up on his behalf, all of his former players and coaches who came from all over the country and even outside the country to travel here to honor him. And she was telling me that you know, she used to lament with Patty Edwards, the wife of Lavelle Edwards, about events like this where everybody would come at them, meaning the wives, about tickets and seating and all this stuff, and for events of this nature, and how they always were the ticket brokers, and they always would talk about, well, someday we won't have to do this because we'll just be able to sit back and enjoy the ride. And she says, now here we are, and and I'm still the ticket broker for all these people, and I'm still trying to figure out how many people get in a picture. They want an official picture of Mac and his family and a few other people for the event. And she said, and all of a sudden I said, okay, you people over here for the picture. And all the former players came, and everybody came and started crowding in, and the photographer's going, no, we just need to, we have to, gee. And there's like 100 people standing there going, oh, I'm getting in I came here, I'm getting in the official picture with Mac. So, here we go. And she said it was such a great event, and they had such a great time with their family, and I know that it meant the world to him, not just the honor, but maybe even more so how everybody responded to him personally about receiving the honor. That was really what took him.
What is it about Ron McBride, Frank Layden, the elderly statesmen that we've had here in our state? It's one thing to be very good at what you do and coach teams up where you win and coach teams up where you have some success. But there have been plenty of really, really good coaches that have won at a high level that don't have the type of respect, adoration, and love that men like that have. What's the secret sauce there?
Well, and it's the same thing with Coach Edwards, of course, Lavelle Edwards. It was the same thing. They appeal to people because they're so humanizing, if that's a word, in how they approach everyday life. It's not just about their sport. It's about the young men that they're working with. It's about caring for them. It's about the people who you're trying to show a certain path that can be successful for you, not just in your sport, but in life in general. If you adopt these principles that we feel are important, and all of those guys, were people person first, if that's such a phrase to use, because they cared about their players, and they cared about more than just the basketball, the football that was going on, and the players feel that. Spence, players know when you care about them or when you care about yourself and what's going on with you. And with those guys that you mentioned, all of their players would understand as they went along for the ride that those coaches cared about them as individuals more so than what was going on. And when you have that, and you have that kind of buy-in from your players, then you can not only have a lot of success, but you also build a bond for them that is lifelong.
Yeah, and I don't know that anyone embodied it more than Frank. You're good to mention Lavelle, and obviously Mac, and to see the former players, and I had a lot of them on the show last couple of weeks, just expressing how much they appreciate and care about him. I just imagine that is something that's very special for Mac. And we had Bill Bush on the show yesterday, who coached at Utah. He coached for Mac, he coached for Urban, and then he spent 1 year with Kyle. So it was kind of interesting to hear him bridge the gap a little bit. But there's an interesting, actually, before we get there, I don't really want to talk about the game. It was 63-9. But it's interesting. Last week, you and I discussed a lot of the issues that I believe are real with college football. And I believe a lot of the issues that are really plaguing the sport are behind the scenes with the business of the sport. Because Sports Media Watch came out today with their first 3-week rating report, and college football is up 25% year over year. It would mark the third straight double-digit spike in consumption for college football. But these early season games, like Florida State beat East Florida, 77-3 last week. BYU, like Portland State, looks like they'd struggle with Corner Canyon, and Cal Poly didn't look like they should be on the same field with Utah. I know the economics of what this FBS, FCS thing does for the smaller schools, but I perceive this to be an issue with the sport. These lopsided results based off of two teams that don't look like they should be on the same field with each other.
Well, you're always going to get, Spence, those games have always been, commonplace in the early part of the schedules, the late August into mid-September games. They're always called in the scheduling world the money games for the smaller school. They get paid X amount of money guaranteed that helps them tremendously more often than not with their athletic budgets at their schools. So they understand they have to come in and hey, the U did that, not that long ago when they would go to schools like Nebraska in the early season and get pummeled or something and come home with $500,000 or $750 for the budget and whatever. And that's just, you're talking about economics. That's just the economics for those unproven or smaller programs. How about the one in last week with Florida? Florida, invited what's the name? I forget who they put. Was it Florida Atlantic? USF.
Yeah.
South Florida, and invited them to come to Gainesville, and USF beats them, and not only gets the win, but also takes home the check for $500,000. Says thank you very much, and that's the danger you have if you're one of those schools that is just playing those so-called money games to pad your win-loss record, but I don't see those things going away anytime soon, Spence, because everybody tries to get set themselves up with if you can, a 3-0 record going into your conference schedule, because that gives your guys some confidence, whether it's false confidence or not, in how they're playing, and gives them a little bit of boost going into their first conference games. And and then we see how they roll. Once they get into that, and the U's going to have that. Hey, are they supposed to win at Wyoming this week? Yeah, I think so. But says who? I mean, Wyoming is going to see this as a big opportunity for them to have a so-called big boy neighbor, if you will, come in, and they're going to be ready to try and play and stand up with them and see what they can do. And the U better not be overlooking them, because that could be a setup game where they get upset, and if that's the case, then they would be coming home, licking their wounds, and yet having to get ready the next week for a conference opener at home against a Texas Tech team that will be ready to play. So every game you play, I know it's a cliche, Spence, but it's really true. You have to focus on that one game. You have to be ready to go each week and focus just on that one thing, and make sure that you have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed and ready to go, because otherwise you're going to find yourself in a Florida type game in the fourth quarter, which nobody who's a Utah fan wants to see.
So it's led to this interesting conversation that's taking place about kind of best practices and how best practices are shared. I know it happened with you guys of the Jazz a lot, because Greg Popovich himself talked a lot about wanting to build the Spurs the way that Jerry and Scott built the Jazz, and Kevin, and so it happens in every league. I had Kalani on the show 2 weeks ago. Kalani played for Lavelle, of course. He coached for Witt for about a decade, defensive coordinator. And there's this interesting dynamic. One of the things that I think makes BYU Utah not just a great game or a great rivalry is the interconnectedness between the two programs, and almost like this incestuous feel where guys played at Utah and they coach at BYU, guys played at BYU, they coach at Utah, they coach at BYU, they coach at Utah, vice versa. And even you go up to Utah State, Gary Anderson's coached everywhere. Like, it's a really interesting thing when you juxtapose it to the way that a lot of fans feel about the game and how much venom the fan bases have with each other, when there's a lot of respect between the coaching staffs. But I asked Kalani. Kalani's been on the job 10 years now. This is year 11. And if I read a national outlet talk about BYU football, and certainly the past couple of years, and they write about their belief on what the team is, if you just took BYU off the heading and blacked out the names, you would think they're writing about Utah. Yeah. Because they're talking about this fast physical defense, and if Bear Bachmeier, this young freshman, can at least be average, BYU football will be in most every game. And Utah football, year after year, if the offense comes to the party, they compete for championships. That's just what they do under Kyle. So I asked Kalani, as you've built this thing up for a decade, how much of this is yours? How much of this is things you learned from coaches you coached with or coaches you played for? He said, none of it's mine.
Yeah, right.
Right? Like, these are all things I learned from Lavelle and Kyle and Morgan and A-Rod's down there. He was up here for a while. Jay Hill. We could keep going.
No.
I just find it a really interesting thing that for a football game that is thought by fans to be this knockdown, drag-out battle, and we just hate everything about the other side, the coaches, they share their plans and they build these programs up in pretty similar ways.
Yeah, and also now, Spence, with the new transfer rules and everything, now you got the same thing going on with players. So you got the players from Weber State, left Weber State when Jay Hill went to BYU, and all of a sudden BYU's got a bunch of guys who were at Weber State, but they can play at the BYU level. Well, apparently they can, and the same thing with other coaches that move around, and the players are able to follow with them. Of course, the U being a big example of that this year. With the New Mexico with the Dampier coming up and Jason Beck coming and being the offensive coordinator and now playing at this level and this level, whatever that means at the moment. We'll see when they get into the Big 12. I know you've been talking about the potential, which obviously is still there because it's real at the moment, although it's early. Both BYU and Utah have to play 6 games before they get to the game in Provo in the middle of October against each other. And they're 4-0, right, combined. And so everybody here is hoping, crossing their fingers, that there could be a potential 6-0 BYU team versus a 6-0 Utah team in a conference game in the middle of October, which would really be heightened up. But, is that going to happen? That means both teams have to win, 4 games in a row coming up. I don't know. I'm not sure, in the grand scheme of things, which side I would take in that if they're both going to go undefeated by the time they get, usually somebody trips up somewhere along the way or a team loses 23-20 on a bad call or a missed call or something with a minute to go or whatever. And so that part's going to be interesting. But if they both move in that direction, they both get to 6-0, it's going to be interesting because, as you say, the coaches know each other. The coaches know what's going on. Kalani is exactly right. I mean, it's the same thing, in the NBA. You ask coaches, how much of this stuff is, new innovative stuff, and guys who go, I got all this stuff from this guy and that guy and the other guy, and we just tweak it a little bit, or we happen to have, my old the old anecdote I used to give about how good teams can be. And I would say, well, all you need to do is have Magic and Kareem on your team, and your team is going to be pretty good no matter who's coaching. So you got to have the players, you got to have the guys to execute. And the kid at BYU looks like he's a tough nut, and who comes into a program, Spence, as a transfer true freshman from another school and says, yeah, I want to be the starting quarterback, and you know what, I'm going to wear number 47, which is my number as a linebacker, from my Pee Wee team or whatever it was. And, that takes something just a mindset to say I'm going to be that kind of different guy. But the toughness he's brought and the skill level that Devin Dampier is showing at Utah in the first few games has got both fan bases really amped up.
Yeah, it just continues to strike me as far as how far we've come as a college football market, compared to where we were once upon a time. I know we already talked about this, but I was getting nostalgic about it with the MAC stuff over the weekend. And your point's well taken. Doing this job I always say this, like, if you're going to do like a power poll or a power ranking, or, there's a lot of noise around the AP poll right now because a young lady who writes for the SoCal News Group and covers USC, essentially she's an AP voter, and you already referenced that Florida lost to USF last week. Well, she moved Florida up 2 spots and didn't put USF in the top 25, and then did a video trying to explain her logic. It's just clear that she didn't even know that the game had happened. So I find it impossible to try to analyze this sport based off of projections because, to your point, you never know what could happen. So the way I analyze it is what I've already seen, right? What have you already done? And, like, how good are you based off of the games we've seen? Because trying to project and move forward, from a sports talk radio standpoint in Salt Lake City, Utah, I'll bang the drum to hope that Utah and BYU are both 6-0 prior to that game in October. But trying to predict this stuff is an exercise in futility.
Yeah, well, the one thing that I think the Utah program, the first two games, to your point, is that their offense has been very efficient with Dampier, and and it looks like he's the kind of guy who is smart enough at that position to just try and go get the play that's in front of him.
Yeah.
It looks like he doesn't try to do too much. He doesn't try to be the hero, flinging the ball all over the place. It looks like he can get check downs and just dump it off for a 5-yard gain and come back the next play and that kind of thing. And the Bachmeyer kid and at BYU looks like he's really a tough nut. And and he's willing to stick his head in there and try and get an extra couple yards. And whether the coaches want him to do that or not may be another thing. But they both are showing the ability to take leadership roles early in a season, and that's the thing that's key, Spence. If you have guys at those positions and they're willing to do the things that can help you to win. Now, of course, their games haven't been really competitive in that regard, but they're getting what I would call a live practice against another team in front of fans, and so they've got all that energy going on, and they're showing how they can handle it and react to it. And then we'll see what the U does this weekend in front of a hostile crowd at Wyoming, and then coming back and playing a Texas Tech team to start off the conference season at home, and then BYU goes on the road next week at East Carolina, which again is supposed to be another fairly easy game for them. But hey, same thing, Spence. They got to travel across the country. They got to play a team that's excited for a 2-0 BYU team to come into their place and maybe make a mark like USF did last week in Gainesville. So those things, I never count any of those games out because you never know how the emotion in the game is going to play out. And obviously you never know what's going to happen during the course of a game in terms of injuries or guys getting dinged up, or just your reference point a few minutes ago about the San Francisco 49ers, who had a nice win on the road at Seattle, and now they find out that two of their main offensive guys might be out for a while. Mm-hmm. So you just got to play those things one week at a time, and you go about your business.
Richard Smith is live in studio, our guy who joins us every single week. We have some breaking news. This is not a political show, but in case you haven't heard, Charlie Kirk, a right-wing commentator who was speaking at UVU, he was shot earlier today, and according to the Salt Lake Tribune, he has passed away, which is just super sad, and I cannot believe it happened in our state, and I'll leave that there. He has a wife and 2 young kids. That's tragic. There's no other way to put that. All right, with IFA Step 4 Fall and Winter Lawn Foods, you'll get stronger roots now and an early green up next spring. It's the ultimate lawn owner power move. More at your local IFA or at ifa.coop. Coming up on the other side, more with Smitty, live in studio. All right, some really horrible news breaking about 10 minutes ago. Conservative activist Charlie Kirk, who's the CEO and co-founder of the conservative youth organization Turning Point USA. He's a right-wing influencer. He has died after being shot today at an event at Utah Valley University. President Trump just sent out a statement of his own. It's just super tragic, very sad. Don't really have the words for it. Probably not qualified to handle things like this in a space like that. Thinking of everybody down there, UVU. Charlie has a wife and 2 young kids, and if you make this about anything political, I think that's pretty disgusting at a time like this. So very sad day here locally. A lot of news surrounding this event. So Charlie Kirk was speaking at UVU. He was shot, and according to President Trump, he has now passed away. All right, Richard Smith, live in studio. Smitty, you have had quite a busy travel schedule, and you have quite a month coming up. I grew up in the Sampras Agassi era of can we get Smitty's mic on, please? Of U.S. men's tennis. And then, of course, there was the Federer, Djokovic, Nadal run. Mm-hmm. And I'm no expert. I don't talk a ton of tennis. I don't watch a ton of tennis. I only played it here or there growing up. This Alcaraz kid, man, and Sinner too. Like these two, when they play, I don't love comparing eras. It's one of the things whenever I would have Jeff Van Gundy on the show and I tried to go there, he would summarily dismiss the conversation, whether it was LeBron, Jordan, or whatever. Right. They just seem more powerful than any of the other players. Yeah, and look, I know you have to talk about surfaces and Nadal on clay or whatever, but when you see Sinner and Alcaraz play, doesn't it feel generationally different?
Well, they've been doing it for a while now, Spence, in their age groups, growing up as teenagers. There's a great Netflix documentary for anybody who's interested in that on that Spanish Netflix did, and they overdubbed it with subtitles last year on Alcaraz, and just I think it was a 3-part mini series, but it was on him growing up and all the stuff, and he and his people gave Netflix full access to him a year ago, and it just came out about 6 months ago, and where he's talking about his training and all the stuff and all the pressures on him and with his family and all the stuff you really don't pay attention to, as sports geeks. Just watching, whatever sport it is you're interested in, but all the stuff that goes on behind the scenes to try and get you there, and especially in individual sports like tennis or golf, where you're really your own business, and you're an independent contractor, and everybody who you're friends with, you can be friendly and maybe friends with, but everybody else you're playing against is hoping the worst for you, even though they'll never say it, because it could potentially help them, right? Because everybody's out on their own. And this is a great thing with Alcaraz on camera in this documentary, talking about the fact that he doesn't know, how his career is going to unfold, because he's only 20. He was 21 at the time of filming, and he's 22 now, but whether he wants to do things that make him happy, he wants to do things that provide him a life outside of tennis, and he doesn't know if he has the inner fortitude of a Nadal, he mentioned specifically, or Djokovic, who these guys just had that tunnel vision all of their career about, this is what I want to do, so I'm blocking out everything else. Everything in life is not in my purview. I am trying to get this done at this part of my life, and it's an interesting thing for people who might be interested in that kind of insight to go look that up and watch that. But these guys have been doing it since they were younger guys in the U16, 17, 18 junior tournaments, and now as long as they stay healthy, it looks like it's going to be the two of them, with some other young guys, Jakub Menchik, the young kid in Czech Republic, just turned 20, João Fonseca, 18-year-old in Brazil, both played at the U.S. Open, won matches there. Those guys have a chance to come up and be in the next group of guys. A good friend of mine, Kevin Kempen, who is just retired from being the CEO of Head North America, lives here in Salt Lake. Shout out to Kevin, and he was telling me last year that a lot of the better guys now tend to be bigger guys. Now Alcaraz is an exception because he's 6 foot, 170, but he's such a strong, powerful guy and has a solid lower base that really can attack his shots. But guys like Sinner, who is 6'4", Zverev, who is 6'5", Taylor Fritz is 6'5". All these top guys, Tsitsipas is 6'4". All these top level players are bigger guys who are getting more on their more power on top of their serves, and especially on the faster surfaces. They can get those shots, those serves off at 135, 140 plus. And I watched a kid at the U.S. Open when I was there a couple weeks ago. The Pericard kid from France, who's 6'8", and he was bombing them at 142, 145, and he has an interesting path if he continues on there, where he may be showing some stuff in the next few years. He's a young guy at 24, but the game of men's tennis anyway is now one of power, no matter what surface you're on, and Sinner and Alcaraz seem like they're at the top of that pile right now.
Of all the events you've been to, I talk about this all the time. You know, there's something about the show that pro football puts on as an in-person, just a consumer, a fan, going to an NFL football game. A lot of people equate it to like the modern-day Gladiators with just the feel of the stadiums. You know what I mean? And And, it was a lot of fun growing up, going to MetLife, seeing Giants games and seeing Jets games. And, we've got the Raiders in Vegas now, so it's just a little bit of a skip and a jump. If you want to go to Allegiant, Broncos aren't too far away. The best spectator event that you've ever attended, what is it and why? Is there one you can land on? Because the U.S. Open, it's a box a lot of people want checked.
Yeah, that's a big-time event, Spence, because it culminates the tennis season. The 4 majors start in Australia in January, and then of course they go to Roland Garros in late May, and then they go to Wimbledon in early July, and then they culminate at the end of August, early September, and with the U.S. Open. So it's the big culmination of the year. Arthur Ashe Stadium is the biggest tennis venue in the world at 23,000 spectators. It's just the energy of New York and all of that feeds into it. You're talking about football. It's people who would be interested in this kind of thing, a dichotomy of it. Go check out on YouTube. George Carlin used to do a great routine on the difference between sports and between particularly baseball and football. And he used to talk about football being the military and the army, and we're on the gridiron and we're marching down the field, and it's 1st and 10, and you better get there before the 4th down comes, and all of this kind of stuff. And he used to juxtapose that with baseball, where he says, baseball players, they play on a field and they're out in the field playing and they're running around, and they don't know where they're running to next, depending on where somebody hits the ball. And he said, and in baseball, you don't know when it's going to end. There's no clock, so it could go on forever, And he used to, go back and forth, but it's really a funny thing, but it's really true. And I've often thought that about football. The guys are in their helmets and they're in their pads and I said this to Linda, the other day we were watching a game, and I said, I don't know who would want to play football as a kid growing up when you have other choices in the neighborhood or whatever it is, and you decide, I want to put on some pads and a helmet and see how many times somebody can hit me right in the gut as hard as they can. Who wants to do that? But there's a lot of guys who want to do it.
And there's something about this sport that makes it somewhat Teflon, because over the years, and we discussed this a little bit a couple of weeks ago, for our listeners that don't know this, the most watched basketball game in the history of the sport of basketball took place in Salt Lake City. It's just a couple miles away at the Delta Center. It was Jordan's, last game with the Bulls. Mike came back a couple times. But it was Michael's shot. It was the shot. crossing over Brian Russell after stealing it from Carl. The most watched basketball game in the history of the sport actually took place here in Salt Lake. We're a great basketball market with Magic and Larry at the Huntsman Center, and
It was the most watched college game.
Most watched college game of all time. The history of both BYU, Utah basketball, Stu Morrill, Utah State. Obviously, you were with the Jazz for 40 years. There was this time where the NFL and the NBA were kind of in lockstep with interest, with ratings, with numbers, with revenue. And then the NFL caught this cannon and just went boom and just shot up. And after that point in the 90s, the separation is wild. And the NBA, I don't think, will ever close the gap. And whether it's CTE, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's players misbehaving, whether it's political this, that, or whatever, you always hear pundits say, okay, well, the NFL's got to be careful with this one. Nothing stops the momentum of pro football. It just continues to gain momentum, revenue, generate interest. What is it about football that captures America's attention?
Well, that is a good question, Spence. I don't think I'm qualified to answer that. I know that, look, in the spring, the Super Bowl is now usually in early February, right? And then you have a month off or whatever. Everybody takes a breath, and then they start talking about the draft. And now the NFL draft. Did you see it this spring in Green Bay? They had 200,000 people out on the plaza
and
outside Lambeau Field.
They had to say no more, else more people would have come in.
People there to watch your team pick some guy from southeastern Wyoming State who you never heard of, and everybody's hooting and hollering. Like, what is that? I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's the way they package it, the way they market it. I mean, you know, look, our radio station here, as soon as the U football program gets to 100 days away, they're counting down,
baby.
72 days from kickoff, you know, like whatever. What is that? The fascination, I don't know. Is it the physicality? Is it hitting people? Is it like you say, you know, short of a version of the old Roman Colosseum and the gladiators, and somebody's going to die out there, or somebody's going to get carried off on a stretcher or something? I don't know. It's fascinating to me how it's gotten to this point. But you're exactly right. The numbers have risen. The numbers, you're talking about NIL. You don't know, Spence, now who's really on your college football team. You're excited to go watch them because this new kid is supposed to be something, but he transferred in from New Mexico, or he transferred in from Stanford, or he came from some other, you know, Western Kentucky school and whatever, and you know, all these guys are just coming through the door in the turnstile, and then next year it's going to be a different group of guys, and you would think your fan base would go, well, I don't even know who these guys are. Now, why am I rooting? It's just the opposite. It's like, oh, we got new guys, and they're supposed to be good, so I guess I better get my seat before somebody else gets my seat because I want to see what's going on. And that part of it is fascinating to me. I don't know what, you know, the whys and what fors of it, but it is something that people are responding to.
Yeah, it continues to be this behemoth. And look, the second most consumed sport in America is college football.
Yes,
and there's a huge gap. I believe the NBA is still third, but third by a long shot, right? Like it's not even close. And there have always been these things that people think would derail it, but the train just keeps on rolling down the track. And you know, the other funny thing, Smitty, is fans almost view it and speak about it in like reverent religious tones.
Yeah, well, it's the way they package it. I mean, they just shove it down your throat year round. I mean, what are we doing with 2 weeks of promos on ESPN to tell you that the NFL draft is 10 days away, and it's going to be 3 days of activities, and we're going to show you, you know, who the Jacksonville Jaguars pick in the 5th round. You're going to want to be tuned in for that. You know, like why? Why would I do that? And yet they promote it so much that somehow they get into the psyche of the general sports fan to say, well, this, whatever it's going to be, is something that I'm not supposed to miss, so I better pay attention to it because otherwise I'm going to be the guy left standing out on the curb when the bus goes by. And so whatever that is, they've done a great job of promoting it and hyping it up and making sure people are paying attention to it. And, drafting guys that half of them you won't see come September and the start of the season or whatever. But that part of it is whoever's in charge of that, whoever thought of that and promotes and spends a lot of money doing it, they're the guys who are winning the game.
The other thing that strikes me as different when it comes to the way people consume this sport is there's something, and I do talk about this oftentimes with the college game, where people just feel differently about their school. There's a good chance you met your wife in college. There's a good chance you met all of my friends to this day are guys I met at the U. Like, my community is built around my time at the University of Utah. All 5 of my siblings met their partners at BYU. My parents were high school sweethearts, went to BYU together. There's something that draws you in when you're cheering for your school that's almost more emotional, and there's a community feel. You talk about the countdown we do on the station, and I have fun with it. I poke fun with it, too. I mean, it's a very reverent thing for Porter. Porter loves our countdown. But when we hit like 30 days before Utah football, and I live up on campus now, close to campus, the Ute flags are out. Yep. The Ute football signage is out. Folks are walking around campus with their Ute football gear. And I'll go over to Buddy's house on Sunday, and his wife will be wearing her Rams jersey, like hanging out with us watching games, where I don't think any other sport really gets that. There's something about a community draw with the school you attended, and I think a lot of it is steeped in maybe you met your employer when you're in school. Maybe you found your career in school. You met your partner in school. You met your friends in school. I think there's something that's like a little less tangible that ties people to their college football teams in a way that I don't think any other sport really gets.
Yeah, it's interesting, too. I think, Spence, I think you're spot on with the whole thing of the human condition, of the fabric of people wanting to belong to something that's a collective where other people have a like interest as you do. And I also think some of it, Spence, is our society now 5 years later, coming out of COVID, where everybody was stuck in their house and you weren't supposed to talk to your neighbor and you can't go to the grocery store and you got to keep your distance and all these things that really took a lot of that communal aspect to sports and getting together in those kind of events away from us. And now we're just coming out of that and people are getting back into the flow of that. And I think there's something, whether it's subliminal or subconscious, I think, people are going, okay, now we get to do this again. And so I'm going to cherish it even a little more than I did before, because I realize it can be literally taken away from me at any moment. And so I'm going to pay the extra money, whatever it is, to go to the football game or to go to the BYU basketball game with 20,000 other people or whatever, and have this communal experience. And then I think also there's a good part of that that's that you have to give the credit to the marketing people who just kind of shove it down your throat in some respect and just say, hey, you don't want to miss this on Saturday. You better, if you're not at the game, you better be in your seat at home with the TV turned on and the popcorn ready, because this is going to be something. And whether it turns out to be something or not, I don't know, but whether it is, the next week they do it again and they hype it up again. And so it's fascinating to me how we respond as human beings to this. But it's also fun to be part of it, and it's fun to be part of a group that has a like-minded approach to whatever your team is and whatever the sport is that you're engaged in.
And I think you hit something, like you hit the nail on the head with something you said there when it comes to people's innate desire to be part of a community, whatever that is, and there are a lot of communities that I don't understand, whether it's religious or political or whatever, but I understand the desire to belong to something that makes you feel like you're part of something, that makes you maybe because life is hard. You want to escape life for a little while. You want to throw on the Ute jersey and walk up to the tailgate and just go see people, right?
Yeah.
The other dynamic is this, Smitty. We have 5 more Utah home games this year. There are 5 Saturdays, right? You look at an NBA calendar or you look at a baseball calendar.
Yep.
You're like, oh, I don't need to go to the Jazz game tonight. I've got 40 more opportunities to do this year.
Yep.
Or when they're good, maybe 50, but they're not going to be good for a long time. Or if you're a Major League Baseball fan, I don't need to go tonight because I've got 81 more of these. I do think there's something to the sprint nature and the prescient feel of every game because there just aren't as many of them.
Right, and I agree with that. I think that's because you have the long haul all during the week of talking about it and analyzing what happened the previous weekend and then looking forward to what you think may happen this coming weekend. And it builds up, and everybody talks about it around the water cooler at work or with your friends at lunch or whatever it is. And I remember talking to guys, when I was in the NBA and guys who would play overseas. And remember one time one of the guys I was talking to played in Greece, and he said, it's the fans get really rowdy in Greece, but it's kind of like a football in the U.S. in that. In the domestic leagues, a lot of times in Europe, sometimes you only play once a week and you play on the weekend. So he would say, if we got on a 3-game losing streak, okay, we lost 3 weekends in a row, we hadn't won a game in almost a month.
Yeah.
And the fans would be merciless. And he said that was the hardest thing because you're trying to practice all week waiting to get to the next game to try and get that monkey off your back, and I think there's something to that in terms of football where it's once a week and the fans get excited about it. And if you're winning, like the local teams have so far, then fans get even more jacked up about the next game and about the hope and the possibility that you could go on some kind of a special run from week to week if you can keep that going. Hey, look, the U had that last year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Cam Rising was in the middle of Game 4, and they were about to win the game to go 4-0, and everybody's all excited. And here we get. This is what we thought. Here we go. We're on this train, and he gets hurt, and bingo, bango, bongo. They lose 6 of the next 7 or whatever it was, and it fell apart. Because he was such a key member of that, and with other injuries and so forth. But those things can get derailed real quickly. But the fans want to be part of something that's a collective where you all have the same mindset and you all are supporting each other. And by doing that, Spence, you and I are fans of a certain team, and we share those common feelings. And when we do, we're really affirming to each other that hey, you know what you're talking about. Yeah, you know what you're talking about. Yeah, all right, guys, here we go, and that makes you feel good, and that makes you feel part of the issue. That's why, Spence, one of the greatest phrases in sports is, oh, yeah, we won the game last weekend, or they say, oh, they lost the game last weekend. Mm-hmm. It's easy to hear the fans who want to be considered part of it when it's positive, but it's those guys when they lose, right? Mm-hmm. We win and they lost, and that's the phrase a lot of fans use, right?
It's true. All right, Smitty, before I say you lose, you've got a pretty exciting box that will be checked this month, right? You're hitting your final state.
That's right. Well, Spence, we talked last year about I had spent a lot of my life going to baseball games, big baseball fan, and finally, in the last few years, Linda and I were able to travel a lot and count off the last handful of baseball stadiums, and I finished off all 30 baseball parks last summer as a so-called bucket list deal. And then it came up, well, what's my next thing? I don't know, but then I started thinking about it during the winter and realized, hey, I've been with all my travels, work, and personally, very fortunate to have traveled to 48 of the 50 states. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, that's got to be something, right? Like I gotta finish that off, whatever that means. So this spring, I went to my 49th state, which was North Dakota, to my nephew's wedding. Shout out to Oliver and Abby Nelson. And I got married in Bismarck, North Dakota. And then the end of this month, I'm going to get off my 50th and last state by going to Arkansas and had a lot of trips from the Jazz over the years planned there for scouting opportunities, and they always got canceled because of weather in the middle of winter, ice storms and whatnot. But the end of the month, I'm going to go to Fayetteville, Arkansas, and watch Notre Dame at Arkansas.
Awesome.
SEC football game, Notre Dame football game on the road.
It's awesome.
And that'll be a fun way to tick that box and finish that off, and looking forward to that.
Smitty, you are the man. Great to see you. Glad you're reunited with your iPad. It was fun to play a little golf with you over the weekend as well.
Oh, that was great. How about your dad? That was great.
Yeah, it was fun.
Being able to hang out with Dad. And first time I ever met Jason Christ.
Yeah.
And what a nice man he is. And we had a fun time getting to know each other a little bit. And that was fun. I appreciated you including me in that.
Nobody broke any course records, but we had a good time.
They don't. Do they keep course records for most strokes on a round?
Oh, good point. Good point. Yeah, my birdie on one, and then it was all downhill. It was all downhill after that.
That's right.
But it's great to see you, my friend, okay?
Thanks, Spence.
All right, the great Richard Smith stops by today, courtesy of our friends at IFA Country Stores. With IFA's Step 4 Fall and Winter Lawn Food, you'll get stronger roots now. And an early green up next spring. It's the ultimate lawn owner power move. More at your local IFA or at IFA.coop. Bill Riley, voice of the Utes, is our guest coming up on the other side.
Three receivers wide to the right-hand side, one to the left-hand side on 2nd down and 9 from the Cal Poly 45. Diefenbach fires wide to the outside. It's picked! It's going to go to the house! Jackson Benny! The streak is alive! 22 straight years with a pick six for Utah! Benny with a house call!
The dulcet tones of the voice of the Utes, one Bill Riley, who joins us on this Wednesday afternoon. Riles, happy Wednesday, sir. How are you?
Spence, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Appreciate the time today, Bill. So let's just let's get to some of the things, some of the particulars from a week ago, and let's start with something I've not been able to really dig in with you as a guest. Coach Mack into the Ring of Honor there. Of course, that was a great day. Had a chance to just say hello. He was very busy, very decked out in his Hawaiian lei, and a lot of people wanted a piece of Coach Mack. But what was that like for you to see, Riles, and what does Ron McBride mean to Utah football?
Well, I was lucky enough, Spence, in the week leading up to the event to be able to sit down with both Coach Mack and Roy Jefferson and just kind of walk down memory lane for longer form sit-down interviews, and it was great. I mean, Mac's been a friend for a long, long time, and it's a very, very deserved honor. I asked him, I said, so how many people do you think you're going to have coming to the game as part of the event? He said, a few hundred. So,
perfect.
Roy Jefferson had a good crowd, but, everybody that knows Mac is a friend, and it was just, I was just so happy for him and Roy too, because, Roy had a great pro career and he was a great two-way player. But for Mac, and I think I've said this with you before, I think he's one of the 3 or 4 most important figures in University of Utah football history. What we have today doesn't happen if Ron McBride doesn't take the job back in 1990 and, change the culture and make the program a winning program and instill pride and toughness and everything else to Utah football. He laid the foundation. Urban came in and had a nice couple of year run, kind of made Utah football cool. And then obviously Kyle's greatest coach in football history here at the University of Utah. But without Mac, none of that happens. And so I was so happy for him. And I didn't know Roy Jefferson at all, Spence, but I'd always heard about him from my friend John Pease, because they were teammates back in the early 60s. And John always told me, he says, best football player I ever played with was Roy Jefferson. And he used to tell me stories. And so for me to be able to have a chance to sit down with Roy and talk to him and recount his time at Utah was a lot of fun. So I thought it was really, really cool that both those guys got put in the Ring of Honor.
You know what is interesting to consider for listeners that don't know? Obviously Coach Witt has a tie to Coach Mack, but Morgan has a tie to Coach Mack. He was recruited by him. He hired Jason Beck. And look, you could keep going, Sharif. The majority of the coaches on both Utah and BYU's roster have a direct tie to Ron McBride, for our listeners who didn't know that.
Well, yeah, and I mean, Luther Ellis, I asked Mac when I talked to him, I said, because he had to come in and change the culture when he took over the job, I said, was there a player that was most instrumental in you turning the program around and turning Utah into a winner? And he didn't hesitate. He said, Luther Ellis. When I got Luther to commit and he came here, it changed everything. And now Luther is the defensive tackles coach. Lewis Powell coaches ends. He was recruited and played for Ron McBride. Colton Swan played for Coach Mack at Weber State and coached with him at Weber State. So there are so many ties, and Mack is kind of the through line on all of this stuff.
Yeah. So really special day to say hello to Coach Mack, and he looked really touched, Bill, which I thought was really, really cool. It looked like that also meant a lot to him. Is that fair to say?
Oh, I think so. He got a little choked up when he was talking about it with me in the interview, and it was halftime, and I was still kind of on the air, but I had my binoculars watching him, and I think he might have worn those sunglasses on purpose just to kind of maybe hide those eyes that might have been welling up with some tears, because I think to have his name up on that stadium meant a ton. I really do.
No doubt. And also the man responsible for making Utah relevant in the rivalry. Beat BYU 6 times, couple conference championships. Prior to Coach Mack, it was 16-2 during an 18-year stretch. Also a master recruiter, as you referenced, 21 players drafted, Jordan Gross, Jamal Anderson, Luther Ellis, Steve Smith, but the Dyson brothers. I could keep going, and we could probably do a 5-hour show on Coach Mack. But let's move over to, I don't know, Riles, what I perceive to be more of like a fun celebration that Utah football is back, right? I mean, that was kind of the feel around the game. Just good to have Utah football. We only get 6 of these things, man. I say it every year, so enjoy the moment.
Yep. Yeah, I agree, Spence. Again, the opponent wasn't on the level of UCLA or probably even on the level of what Wyoming will be this weekend. But what they did was they went out. They didn't turn the football over. They scored 9 times in the red zone, didn't kick any field goals, just scored touchdowns, got out of the game healthy, got the backups some key time. Bird Ficklin showed some stuff. So I think they just kind of went about it businesslike and kind of checked off a lot of the things you want to do when you're playing a 1AA caliber opponent. And I think they've had 2 good weeks. They'll have Wyoming on the road, which will be a little bit of a test this weekend, too. It's never easy to go to Laramie to play, but I think after 2 weeks, it's hard to argue. Coaches will always be able to nitpick, and there's certainly still some questions because the competition, especially a week from Saturday, is going to get a lot tougher with Texas Tech. But I think after 2 weeks of seeing Utah play, there's really a lot to like about this team.
I agree. And so let's move into the space of what you feel like you know. And it is difficult. UCLA gets beat by Vegas. Cal Poly, not a worthy opponent, all due respect. So keeping the opponent in mind, what do you feel confident in saying that you know about this Utah team through 2 games?
Well, I think they're really talented. I think the defense, what you can see is athleticism, and you can see effort and motor. One of my big questions was the defensive line. How are they going to generate pass rush? The last couple of years they've been pretty good, but they've had to get a little bit more exotic to pressure the quarterback. And I wanted to know, how would the defensive ends and tackles perform? John Henry Daly was the highest graded defensive end in college Power 4 college football last weekend. He's been a really nice find. He was in the program a year ago, transfer from BYU. And he kind of bided his time behind some of those veterans last year, and now he's got 3 sacks in 2 games. So him, Cash Dillon, Lance Holtzclaw, Paul Fitzgerald. Obviously, Logan Fano he suited up, but he didn't play last weekend. So I think that I feel pretty good about that. I think the offense is good, and it's going to be hard to defend because they've got so many options. Would you like to have that 5-star superstar wide receiver? Probably so. But, 11 different guys ran the ball and 9 different guys caught the ball for Utah on Saturday. That just tells me that they've got guys that can make some plays, and they're going to distribute the ball around and make it a little bit more difficult on defenses to focus on where that ball's going this year. So I think the offense is very diverse. I think the offensive line, even with a couple of guys sitting out last weekend, looked good. And I think the defense was solid. I mean, they gave up 3 field goals to Cal Poly. They didn't let them in the end zone, even when the backups were in. So I think there's a lot to like.
So Wayshawn so far has the longest rush and the longest catch, 52-yard catch. It was kind of like last year versus SUU. Now, Wayshawn is certainly going to be in the mix, if not at some point maybe take over that job, even though Nakari's looked good as well. But last year when the Dijon Stanley kid caught a couple of wide open wheel routes where you could have scored, Bill, due respect, we all were like, hey, do they have a secret weapon? But a lot of conversation on like lack of big chunk plays. I don't necessarily fall into the category of being concerned about it because there's 2 trains of thought. Maybe not a ton of chunk plays, but also you're dump trucking the teams you played so far. Any concern from you on what a lot of people have been talking about, maybe not a lot of explosive plays from the offense yet?
Well, they had some. I mean, they didn't have a lot. There were a lot of longer drives against UCLA. But, I mean, you mentioned it. Parker with a 52-yard play. Parker with a 43-yard run. Bird Ficklin with a 38-yard play. So there were some in there. And then you got some of those rushing touchdowns. I think Rogers had a 38-yard reception out of the backfield. They found Dallin Bentley for a nice ball up the sideline. So I think it was better this week. I think it's one of those things that will come. The good news is, with that offensive line, and that you can run the ball and play power football. I think they're still figuring out with some of these weapons who are going to be those big play guys, but I think we've seen some glimpses in a couple of weeks.
Ultimately, I think Devin has passed the first couple of tests with flying colors. There may be some moments where he looks a little hesitant with the footwork just to unleash it. I was thinking about this. I was reading a preview for Georgia Tennessee coming up this weekend, and the writer just pontificated on look, maybe there are a lot of questions. Maybe Gunnar Stockton isn't necessarily a top tier quarterback, but he plays for Georgia, and if you play for Georgia, you just rely on the team around you. And it kind of feels that way about Devin. I mean, as long as Devin relies on these two backs, both of them can really tote it. I know the weapons on the outside still have some questions, but of course the O-line, it's one thing to get nitpicky about the way Devin's looked, and that's tough to do after two blowout wins, but it's got to be nice for Devin to look around and just have this group around him to know that that side of the ball is solidified for the most part while we wait to learn more about the wide receivers.
Well, I think, too, I mean, here's the thing. Yeah, he's not had a lot of big passing number days, but he's completed 75% of his passes basically in 2 weeks. And when the play hasn't been there, he's been able to make something out of it with his legs. So I think the bigger plays will come, Spence. I do. I think, again, 2 weeks in, more chunk plays this week. But he's almost, to me, in this offense, like a point guard just distributing to the open man. And there's a lot of open men to get the ball to. And I think he's just doing a good job of distributing and taking what the defense gives him. They haven't really – I mean, I don't think this weekend – I think in the UCLA game early they forced a couple balls downfield, but I didn't feel like against Cal Poly they really forced anything. And when it wasn't there, he just would go pick up 5, 6, 7 yards.
Since I asked you what you feel like through 2 games, what are you still waiting to learn?
The big play stuff, I think the down the field stuff is still to evolve. Jackson Benny, we saw him catch a 17-yarder. He's run some deep routes and looked good. Tobias Merriweather, he had the 36-yard grab against UCLA. Those big plays are going to come. Who's it going to be? We know who kind of the short and intermediate guys are. Who's the guy that kind of takes the top off or threatens the defense deep? So I'm still waiting to see that, like everybody is. And, I think it's just what will this look like when the competition gets better? Utah's doing exactly what you're supposed to do against teams that you're better than. They're better than UCLA. They're better than Cal Poly. We'll see what they do against Wyoming Saturday up there. I think they're better than Wyoming, but you've got to go do it. But then Texas Tech, that's the first really, really big test of a team that's on the, equal footing with you from a talent standpoint, from a ranking standpoint, from an expectation standpoint. So they've got to take care of business, but it's good to do it, and they've done exactly what you're supposed to do, run it up against those lesser teams. But a week from Saturday is going to be really interesting to me, and obviously we'll talk about that next week, but when they play Texas Tech.
So when it comes to and Devin talked about this post-game, and Witt talked about it post-game and during media on Monday, the Cal Poly game obviously was never in doubt. It was a low-anxiety Saturday. There was no way that was ever even going to be kind of close. There were a few mental lapses that manifested. Sharif, during his media this week, was very blunt, gave his group a grade of C- so far, and said he was actually being generous with those grades. Bill, for me, I've talked about this all week. We always forget how young these players are, and certainly in the modern day and age of the inundation of information, they know the score with Cal Poly. They know what time it is. You come off an opening week statement at the Rose Bowl where it's the final marquee game of the college football weekend on Fox that everybody's watching. You go curb stomp UCLA. I think it's just human nature for young people to maybe lose a little focus here or there in a game where you're up by 1 million. I know the coaches will tell you they want their players focused, working hard at all times, but you cannot change human nature. It just is what it is when you're that young. None of the mental errors, and look, I'm just a guy who blabs on the radio. I'm sure for Kyle, he actually maybe enjoys some tape he can show his players as far as what they can improve upon. Did any of the mental lapses, the penalties, the out of position in the secondary concern you at all against Cal Poly, or is it just young people probably just naturally not maybe playing as hard as they want to against a team they know they're going to beat by 1 million?
Yeah, I didn't think anything was egregious. I think the early penalties are just frustrating as much as anything because I think they only had 3 total penalties against UCLA in the opener on the road against a better team. I don't know what goes into it, but I didn't think there was anything wildly egregious that Utah did. It set back a couple of early drives, but nothing major. And again, that's kind of, coaches will never say this, Spence, because they can't, but that's what some of these games are about early in the season before you begin conference play is working some things out, getting everybody on the same page. Get a couple of those procedure penalties or that hold out of the way now, get your technique a little bit better against a team that you're better than, and that way when you line up against ASU and BYU and Texas Tech, your technique and your stance is a little bit better. So there was nothing that that bothered me. I didn't see anything egregious or something that happened repeatedly that you're like, oh man, this is going to be problematic. So I think a lot of that is coaches just coaching the heck out of these guys to make sure it doesn't happen as we get a little further on.
You already said his name, but I believe I've heard Kyle say the name Jackson Benny 4 or 5 times over the past week. He gets the pick 6. That's 22 straight years, which is just wild to think about. But it feels like Kyle really wants to see him featured offensively, and obviously he's got wheels. Obviously he's got ball skills. Any idea what that's going to look like moving forward?
Well, yeah, he's been playing wide receiver. I mean, he had that 17-yard catch against UCLA. He's one of the fastest guys on the team, too, Spence. He's really a freakish athlete. He played volleyball. He played basketball. He played rugby. He played football. I mean, his uncle is Danny Vrains. His brothers have played football as well. This kid is, he's an excellent safety. He can play slot corner. They moved him over to wide receiver because he was just such a good athlete, and he's playing out wide there. I think the sky's the limit for Jackson Benny. And if he's a two-way guy, great. If it's just as a safety or if he just moves to wide receiver. But I think you're going to see him making plays this year. He's really, really good. And I think you're going to see some of that in the pass game as well, because I think he's tall too. He's a little lanky right now. He's at about 190 maybe, but he goes about 6'2", and I think he's got about a 40-inch vertical jump. So he's a really freakish athlete, and I think they're going to find ways to try to get him the football as this thing moves forward.
I wanted to bring you into a conversation. I was watching some of the recaps of the Oklahoma-Michigan game last week, one of the primetime, ranked games that we actually had. We didn't have a ton in week 2. We had a good slate in week 2, but a lot of people honed in on that game specifically to, kind of watch two of the banner blue blood programs in America. And Brett Venables, Oklahoma's defensive coordinator, one of the most highly respected defensive coordinators in America. And this Bryce Underwood kid that Michigan has, you can tell he's got juice. You can tell he's got potential. Yeah. But Venables really put him in a blender. And I know it's too early for the Utah-BYU thing, but BYU's schedule is shaping up where I think they will be and should be 6-0 prior to the Utah game. Utah's got some stiffer challenges. You referenced Tech. I still think Arizona State's going to be good. But if you're a Utah fan, to draw a parallel, you've got to be licking your chops at what Morgan Scalley would be able to draw up for a true freshman in Bear Bachmeier, because BYU this year is a little bit like Utah has been under Witt. Their defense is fast and physical and nasty, but the offense against a compromised Stanford team stalled a lot of time. They didn't take advantage of the opportunities, had some red zone issues. And I just think, even though I don't believe the Retzlaff news really changed overall their ability to be good, when you start a true freshman, at some point he's going to get got. And I just have to believe that Morgan will have the ability to confuse the kid.
It's going to be interesting because he did that a couple years ago. You remember the kid Dante Moore, who's now, I think he's at Oregon, thriving.
Yeah.
But he got his first career start at Utah, and it was a rough day that day. They sacked him. Boy, I think they sacked him 6 or 7 times. He threw a pick 6 in that game. It's tough, but that was in Salt Lake City, and that was, I think, the 2nd or 3rd game of the year. The one thing I'll say about Bachmeier is he'll have about 5 under his belt by the time he gets to playing Utah, and he'll be down at BYU in a little bit more friendly confine. But you're right. Morgan's been very good over the years. I mean, shoot, I remember what he and John Pease did to Jared Goff, who was a senior and a Heisman Trophy candidate and was a top 10 pick. He came in here and threw 5 interceptions. So good defensive coordinators can do that, because the one thing you can't do, even with a young quarterback, I mean, you're even seeing it a little bit with Arch Manning too, is there's no substitution for reps and game experience. And he will see a lot in 5 games. There's no doubt about that. But he won't see what a lot of quarterbacks have seen when they have a full season under their belt or 2 seasons under their belt. So that will be the task when that game comes rolling around in October, is to try to give him a lot of looks and things that he hasn't seen before, because you just can't know what you don't know,
For sure. Speaking of freshmen with juice, didn't know much about Bird, right, outside of what the coaches have been saying. And I'm knocking on wood. We want Devin under center all year. But with what we've seen from Bird Ficklin so far, there's a lot to like about this kid. What's your understanding of the backup quarterback situation with Utah as we sit here today?
Well, it feels like, and I think Kyle addressed this the other day, that Bird, obviously they like Bird a lot and what he can do in that system. Obviously, he played a quarter and a half. Isaac didn't get on the field the other day, so I think they're really interested in seeing what Bird could do, and I think his skill set really fits well with what Utah does offensively now. I think he runs the ball very well. He's got a very live arm. I asked Kyle on the coaches show last night, does he have the best arm in the room? He's like, I don't know about that. I don't know if he does for sure, but his arm is live. He made some really good throws. Worked way down the field, but with pressure in his face. So a lot of what you saw Saturday was some of the stuff that was happening in spring ball with Utah, and they were wildly impressed because he came in, he graduated early from high school. I think he was still 17 when he got on campus and had a really good spring. And then, like a lot of people do, they have up and down fall camps when you're a true freshman, but he's come out of it and played really well. Now, Devin's got this year and next year. Let's not make it the Bird Ficklin era quite yet, because Devin's awfully good, but just glimpses of what we've seen, he's got a very bright future.
All right, Roz, before I set you loose, Groundhog's Day with the Big 12, I don't know who's good. I mean, most of the non-con opportunities have gone by the wayside. Of course, Utah with a win over UCLA. Baylor went to Dallas and got SMU. But now that we have, 3-week sample size, if you include Iowa State, who probably has the most impressive resume so far, who do you think's good in this conference before I set you loose?
I think Iowa State's good. I mean, they beat Kansas State, who's turned out to be not so good, but that was an opening game in Ireland. Then they came home and destroyed a 1AA team. And then they beat their in-state rival, Iowa, who was supposed to be an upper-tier Big Ten team this year. So I think that, if anybody's laying claim to the best team in the conference and you're basing it on what we've seen, I think it's Iowa State right now. I think Utah's right there with them because they had a really nice road win against UCLA and then came home and backed it up with a decimation of a 1AA. BYU looks pretty good, but they haven't played a lot yet. Texas Tech has blown out 2 also-ran opponents, but that's what you're supposed to do against also-ran opponents. I was really impressed with TCU, Spence. I know North Carolina's a hot mess, but that was a road game in a hostile environment, at least for a quarter. I think TCU's pretty good, too. And then I don't think it's a bad loss for ASU, but it's a road loss. But the 2 teams outside of Utah that have impressed me the most early on are probably TCU and Iowa State.
What does success look like driving home from Laramie?
Well, success is not driving home from Laramie. It's hoping that the airplane works and that we fly home Saturday night. It is not driving home and stopping in Rollins or Green River. But I think it's getting out of there with a W and just kind of building on, if you can have another game where you don't turn the ball over. They've got back-to-back games with no turnovers. Force a few turnovers, stay healthy, and get out of there with a win, and then turn your attention to Texas Tech.
All right, buddy. Thanks for the time. Have a great call and travel safe, okay?
Thanks, Spence.
All right, we got 2 hours down. We have 2 hours to go. Coming up on the other side, more college football with our guy, Danny Cannell. No more soft outs? Got it. Utah football heads to Wyoming this week, looking to continue their hot start after dismantling UCLA and Cal Poly. BYU is on a bye. A lot of good games on the slate, though. Week 2 of pro football. We'll get going tomorrow with a really good Thursday night game. Our next guest, friend of the show, stops by from time to time, the legend himself, the great Danny Cannell, on a Wednesday afternoon. Danny, happy Wednesday, sir. How are you?
I'm good, man. It's good to be on. It's becoming a little annual tradition, which I love, catching up with you. It's been a fun start to the college football season. I felt coming into this season it was going to be a really, really fun, entertaining season that was really wide open, and I think that's played out. I'm not great at predictions, but that one I feel pretty confident in so far.
Well, predictions, Danny, in the sport are impossible. I mean, they've always been impossible, but now they're like impossible, with all the changeover with players and coaches. But before we get to some specific games, I will ask you your impressions on these Utah Utes through 2 wins. I don't know how good UCLA is, and I'm not sure that Cal Poly's an accurate litmus test, but this young quarterback, Devin Dampier's looked pretty good through 2 games, yeah?
Yeah, he's looked great. Utah is my mulligan pick, so I'll explain why. So coming into the season, I thought Kansas State, speaking of not knowing anything, I thought they were going to be a team that was going to bring the Big 12, but Utah is my mulligan pick. I think they are the cream of the crop right now in the conference. And you mentioned you don't know how good UCLA is. I don't care. I mean, the way they won that game, I think, is probably most impressive. Like, that was a dominant victory on the road versus a Big Ten team. So I think that's really, really impressive. And you mentioned about Dampier, who I like that move a lot, and it's been pretty trendy. We've seen this happen at Oklahoma and a couple other places. But the fact that he came in there with Jason Beck, his offensive coordinator from New Mexico, shows me that it was comfortable. And I think probably the best thing about what I've seen early is he's eliminated some of the mistakes he made throwing the football. Because last year, 12 touchdowns thrown, but also had 11 interceptions. This year, the clean sheet in the interception column is what you're looking for, and I'm sure that has Kyle Whittingham very happy. Also, some of the other transfer portal movements have really worked out well for the Utes. So I think the season's setting up great for them, as is the schedule. Like, the fact that they get Texas Tech here after the game against Wyoming at home, I think is huge. Arizona State at home. Like, most of their tougher competition is at home. So I think the Utes are sitting in a great spot right now for the Big 12.
Who else in the conference, Danny, do you think is good? I mean, we ran into this issue last year, and so we were all punished. They took away our Big 12 preseason media poll, which is fine because we were all wrong a year ago. Iowa State might have the best resume. BYU, about 40 miles down south, has looked good. So you reference you like the Utes. Who else do you like in the Big 12 this year?
I think it's the hardest one to predict, right? And even still at this point in the season, there's still not really that kind of clear-cut favorite that's risen. I like Utah, but I do think that Texas Tech game is going to be a tremendous amount of fun. And they're that experiment that was, can they buy themselves a Big 12 championship? Can they buy their way into the college football playoff? And it's looked good early, but their competition has been less than stellar. But, like, the returns are good so far. They have a little bit of a test this weekend against Oregon State. I don't see them slipping up there. So I think Texas Tech is as advertised. Iowa State's a unique team to me. They don't have a lot of the 4 and the 5 stars, and it might not be pretty, but Matt Campbell's squad just finds a way to win. Like, that's so impressive what they're able to do to just churn out wins when things maybe they're not putting up 40-plus points out there, on the scoreboard, but they just find ways to win. I'll tell you a team that I like a lot, and they're kind of flying under the radar, is Baylor. Baylor lost that opener to Auburn. I think Sawyer Robertson, their quarterback, is the best quarterback in the country. He's averaging 429 yards through the air. Like, he's 60 yards clear of the next highest passer. He can put that team on his back. I thought they just got a really impressive road win. They're at SMU, who's one of the better teams from the ACC. So those are just a few, but, like, I don't think Arizona State's going anywhere. Even though they lost to Mississippi State, I still think they're a pretty good squad. Kansas, I still think is going to be really good with Jalen Daniels, who's a really good quarterback. They lost a tough road game against Missouri, but I think there's a lot of really, really good quality teams in the Big 12 right now, but I still think Utah's the best.
It's interesting watching Kalani Sitake build up Brigham Young over the course of the last decade. And, Danny, we had Kalani on the show a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him the question because he played for Lavelle Edwards, and he was a defensive coordinator under Kyle Whittingham. And BYU's identity now, Danny, is a lot like Utah's, where people just look at their defense and how fast and physical they are, and they've only allowed 3 points through 2 games. They smoke Portland State, which, again, is kind of a whatever. And then the Stanford game was never really in doubt. They are starting a true freshman quarterback in Bear Bachmeier, and it's going to take him a minute to get his footing. But, the Jake Retzlaff stuff comes down. That probably changes the projection of how people view them. But what do you think of BYU so far this year?
I think Kalani Sitake is one of the more underrated, underappreciated coaches in the country. And I know BYU fans feel differently, and they like him, and I think they found a great spot for him there. And I do think the Retzlaff news really that's a late, change that you all of a sudden find yourself searching. And I think the early returns on Bear Bachmeier have been pretty good. I love any quarterback that's wearing number 47 out there, kind of playing the game a little bit more old school. But I do think, he comes from some bloodlines where his brothers have been really good. But I still think it could be a little bit bumpy for them. As I thought the same thing about Arch Manning. I thought the same thing about Ty Simpson, like other quarterbacks out there. It's just really hard to ask somebody with little playing experience to go through the gauntlet of college football without having some sort of freshman-type moments. But they're off to a great start. If that defense continues to deliver, as you mentioned, that'll keep them competitive in every game. So I would expect BYU to be in the hunt. The good news is, the preseason, the highest win total of any team in the Big 12 was 8.5, which tells you, if you can get to 8 or 9 wins, you've got a chance to win the conference and make the college football playoff. It also is sort of detrimental to the conference, right? Because that probably means you're only a one-bid league unless somebody emerges as 11-1 team, and then the second-best team is there at that 9-3. But I think BYU is exactly where they need to be, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if they pull off some pretty big upsets this season.
Mike Gundy may have learned a lesson last week, and Dan, there's so much to like about Dan Lanning, and obviously, once upon a time, Utah and Oregon Pac-12 buddies. Oklahoma State is a program that was one of the banner carriers in the Big 12 for a long time, but you go up to Eugene after running your mouth. We get to see Dan Lanning's pregame speech. I didn't think Oklahoma State would be in the game. I did not anticipate 69-3. What are your takeaways of that entire dynamic?
That was like jaw-dropping. There were a lot of teams last week that put up 70 points and had really big blowouts, but those were against FCS opponents. Oklahoma State is still a Power 4 team. And I do wonder what that win itself means for Mike Gundy's future. And he really wasn't saying anything that wasn't true, but there's example after example of teams like South Florida last week who has probably a tenth of the budget that the Florida Gators do, and yet what'd they do? They went into Gainesville and got the outright win. So, there's a disparity out there that Mike Gundy is just stating, but it still doesn't, give him an excuse to be non-competitive in that game against anybody. And the ramifications, I wonder if that really does sort of show the end of the Mike Gundy tenure, which has been one of the most impressive tenures in college football. The consistency with which he's won in Stillwater has been pretty phenomenal. I just wonder if sort of the game has passed him by. I don't think he loves sort of the new player movement. He hasn't been shy about that. And if you don't adapt quickly, you will find yourself with a program that is really reeling where it is right now with Oklahoma State. So I think that's the ramification for me is it might mean, and remember last year, they were one of the worst teams in the Big 12. I wonder if this means that retirement isn't around the corner for Mike Gundy, which I think is sad. I think he's been a great character for college football, but I think this might mean more towards the end of that career coming to a close.
Alabama, of course, stubs their toe to start the season. Another one of the games where we didn't learn anything, but they did bounce back. I just wonder, Kalen DeBoer, a former Pac-12 buddy of ours out here, it's always hard to take over for the legend, Danny. You know that as well as anybody, whether it's taking over a quarterback or taking over as coach. Do you think it's a personality fit there? Do you think they're going to be long for him? I mean, it's wild that at 21 it's their lowest ranking in 17 years, but that's what Saban did down there. Do you think he's going to be able to last down in Tuscaloosa?
That's a great question. I have my doubts. And you mentioned the fit. And I just feel bad. I don't know if it was a great job because of the expectations. You don't ever want to be the guy that follows the legend, right? You want to be the next guy. And that's where I think that that'll be set up for a better position. And he's such a polar opposite of what Nick Saban was. Personality, he's friendly with the media. He's got an open door policy. I think with the players, he's more of a player-friendly coach. He's an offensive mind, like basically the antithesis of everything that Nick Saban was. So I expected last year there to be a little bit of a culture shock that could be at the detriment of the team. And when I heard players saying last year, like calling each other out, hey, we got to be on time for meetings, I don't think you ever had that issue with Nick Saban because they were terrified. But I've also, been around this game long enough to know there are more ways to win than just to be one style of coach. Like I played for Bobby Bowden, who was media friendly, was a sweetheart of a man, was, pretty player friendly. Like we all loved playing for him. And I've seen coaches like Nick Saban, like Tony Dungy, soft-spoken. Like there's example after example of different styles of coaching that can ultimately get you to where you want to go. This is one where I think Alabama fans could get in their own way because they're just so used to having this dominant program. If they don't, go to 9 wins this year, I could see the fans getting so loud that it becomes toxic for Kalen DeBoer. Then it becomes hard to recruit, and it becomes a challenge to keep your team together. So I almost feel this is one where the Alabama fans could get in their own way and send somebody packing who's a really good football coach. And I think Kalen DeBoer doesn't forget how to coach. I just wonder, like you said, is it a bad fit or the wrong fit? I think potentially that might be yes. But I will say, let the season play out because they figured out a lot of stuff. And maybe, just maybe, Florida State is a really good football team where all of a sudden that loss, which looked devastatingly bad, maybe it doesn't look that bad at the end of the season. So I want to wait and see how things play out in Tuscaloosa.
Sports Ratings Watch, Sports Media Ratings Watch came out with their data today over the first 3 weeks of the college football season, and consumption across all platforms is up about 25%, which would indicate for 3 straight years more people continue to watch college football. How do you articulate now, Danny, the state of the sport and where you think we're headed? Every time Coach Witt is asked about this out here, he talks about the future of the sport potentially looking a lot like the NFL, which is not a new take, with 2 conferences at one point. But, for all of the conversation about transfer portal and paying players and NIL and not being familiar with new rosters, people are still watching the sport. Saturdays in the fall still feel like Saturdays in the fall. Are you bullish on the future of college football? Are you concerned about it? Where are you at with it?
I am bullish. I mean, I think it's been great for the sport. Some of the atmospheres around college football, it's just there has not been any lack of interest. And if anything, I think the amount of coverage that's gone into the player movement and having the hope and excitement for programs that actually can pay players now, I think programs that felt like they never had a shot all of a sudden do. Think of Indiana last year, what it meant for them to make a playoff run. That's a program that never thought they had a chance for a national championship. SMU made the playoff last year, Arizona State. And I think that's the commonality in a good way that's similar to the NFL. Like the NFL, they only have 32 teams, but I would say 28 to maybe 30 fan bases feel like, hey, we could make the playoffs. So I think the expanded playoffs have really increased the interest. And then the fact that for a long time, I think there were a lot of fan bases who were like, we don't pay our players, we're not willing to cheat, so we don't really have a chance. Now that the schools can pay the players with the revenue share, you're able not only to feel like you have a chance, but you're actually able to buy some players that are willing to leave schools that traditionally might play players under the table. So I think the parity in the sport has really brought back a lot of the interest. I do share my concern. I talk to so many college football fans that have been disgusted at the amount of movement, and they hate seeing a player leave after 1 year, at their program. And I do too. I think we're still figuring out a structure that feels better, where it's not the complete Wild West, which still it does feel like. But I would definitely say the sport is in a pretty good spot right now. It's never been better for the players because they're making so much money. And I think the fact that we've expanded the playoffs and a lot more fan bases feel like they have a chance is a great thing for college football.
Let me ask you, as one of the louder voices in college football, the way the sport is covered, a video surfaced this week and I feel bad because the internet, as you know, Danny, can be a very mean place. And certainly Haley Sawyer is not the only AP voter that we should be focusing on. Excuse me. But ultimately, in the video she posted, It left her open for a lot of criticism, which she's taken. It became pretty clear that she didn't even know that the Florida game had taken place. And the AP poll is supposed to be the place that we go to for guidance from people that actually watch the sport. I don't even look at the coaches poll because most coaches admit they don't even do it. And by the way, nor should they. They have more important things to do. But when it comes to the way the sport is covered, as one of the loudest voices in the media landscape, what do you make of it?
So I've had a love-hate relationship with the AP Top 25 because the thing that's driven me nuts is there's such a brand bias that exists, and really it starts in the off season, and it favors the bluest of blue bloods in college football, and a lot of those reside in the power conferences, which have all the money and all the resources, and those are the teams that should have a harder road, and yet they get the benefit of the doubt because they get so much coverage and they get a lot of these great recruits, and so there's a lot of speculation, and all we do is guess, and a lot of times, especially from 15 to 25, and I've voted in different polls, never the AP, but it is human nature to not know what's happening at a lot of programs in the country. So you might say, well, I've read a lot about the Florida Gators. They've got a young quarterback who's supposed to be awesome, and we're hearing all this great reports coming out of there. So I'll throw them in there at 17, just, picking out a generic number, as opposed to maybe a program like USF, who their quarterback was back and healthy. And, that should have been a team that probably should have been receiving votes in the preseason top 25 if people were paying attention. And here's where the detriment comes to a program like USF. If they had a Penn State logo, a Nittany Lion, or if they wore an Alabama helmet or even a Florida State helmet, they would be in the top 5 right now with the wins that they've gotten. They beat Boise State handily at home. They go on the road in the SEC and play in an environment of Florida and get a win, and yet they're still not in the top 10. To me, that's an egregious disrespect and an egregious willingness for AP voters to throw out everything they thought they knew in the preseason. I really wish you're supposed to start with a blank slate because we don't know anything about any team, especially with the turnover. But instead, you have programs like a South Carolina or even a Penn State, who I think is going to be really good, but they haven't done anything to deserve a top 5 ranking, but we just do it because we think they're going to be good because of everything we saw last year. And maybe they are, but I feel like they should have to earn it just the way South Florida does. And yet South Florida's done a lot more than a lot of teams, and they don't get the respect. So it's a very, very flawed system. I do think Haley Sawyer spoke some truth because she said it does drive conversation. But at the very least, I hope that the amount of people that called her out and others, she wasn't the only one that was called out, I hope it brings them accountability, and they're sort of afraid of what could happen with backlash if they don't pay attention. So I hope they pay attention a lot closer, realizing people are going to start looking at their votes, and then I think that'll get to a better place where there's more accountability with the top 25.
Heavy is the crown if you play quarterback and your last name is Manning. And since you play the quarterback at the highest of levels, I always like to kick the tires with you on that position. First game, not so great. Bounce back against a lesser opponent. What have you seen from Arch so far, and how do you think it looks the rest of the way?
So I was blown away by the amount of hysteria that was around Arch Manning, and I honestly felt bad for him because to be able to live up to that type of hype was going to be impossible all along. And I came in with very, very tepid thoughts on Arch Manning. I've seen way too many 5-stars that just don't work out. Now, I think Arch works because he's in a great environment. He's got great talent around him. Steve Sarkisian has a great history with quarterbacks. I just thought it would be bumpy, and especially I thought it'd be bumpy on the road, which it was for him in Columbus. I had Texas missing the playoffs, going 9-3, because they're going against a better schedule than they were last year, and a lot of their tougher games are on the road, like it was against Ohio State. They still have to go to Georgia this year. They still have to go to Florida in the SEC, which doesn't look quite as tough a task with Florida losing, but that's still not an easy place to play, not to mention they play Oklahoma, who looks better. So I think it's going to be a roller coaster for Arch Manning as he gets comfortable playing at this level. And the only way to get comfortable is to get those reps. And I do think he'll be fine. I just think this year is be a little bit up and down. I think next year is the year to back Arch in Texas. This year, I think it's a little bit too soon.
Vegas right now, Danny, Heisman odds, Garrett Nussmeier's the favorite. John Mateer's right behind him. Dante Moore is third. Arch is fourth, and Devin Dampier, among others, is fifth there at plus 1,500. Give me your thoughts on that list. Who do you think should be the favorite to win it? And do you think Devin has a chance to say something about it at the end of the year?
Yes, absolutely. So much like the season, I feel like the Heisman Trophy is wide open as well. Like there's really not a true clear-cut leader. It's going to be about positioning yourself, to be in this race at the right time. And clearly, Dampier has done that so far, and he's going to have good opportunities once he gets into the thick of Big 12 play. Things I like about him is he's already put up really good numbers. I like the fact that he's a runner. I do think that's something that's becoming a requirement at that position. And right now, I still think you might be throwing money away to back one of the favorites, like a John Mateer, like a Carson Beck. And I think you might actually have value on trying to find somebody like Dampier, who's the schedule sets up nicely, as I mentioned. That's why I like them to win the Big 12. And if you are the quarterback for Utah and you win the Big 12, I think he's got an outstanding chance because he's going to play good. I think he's going to put up big numbers. I think he's got a good chance to be there in New York. I do wonder about sort of the East Coast bias and the national bias against players from the West Coast or the Mountain West, like anywhere in that region. It's just tougher. You don't have as many matchups on ABC in prime time or on ESPN in prime time, but there's no doubt I think he'll be in that conversation late. You asked me about, I'm a little bit biased. I think this thing is wide open. I don't hate Thomas Castellanos at Florida State. He already has a big signature win. I think statistically he'll put up big numbers. And if he's able to thrust Florida State back in that national conversation, he's a pretty dynamic, electric player as well. I don't hate him from a long shot perspective if you want to take a shot on a flyer, for sure.
How many teams are you willing to say you believe can win the national championship this year? Legitimately can actually do it?
I think there's probably 10, I'm looking at a list in front of me. I think Ohio State can. They just did. Penn State was my preseason pick. Texas is on there, and I could be wrong. I don't think they will, but that defense is really legit. And if Arch proves me wrong and develops faster than I think, they could. Georgia could. Oregon could. LSU could. Notre Dame, I have my doubts, but they absolutely could. Alabama, as much as people want to write them off, that roster is still talented. Miami still could. Clemson might be the line where I cut it off because I need to see a little bit more. But I think it's about 10 teams and maybe even deeper as I'm talking myself into it because of the reason nobody looks head and shoulders over everybody yet. But I think this thing is as wide open to get. So I say it's at least 10 deep, and maybe I could talk myself into 12 or 13.
Before I say you loose, Danny, give me some of the games you're looking at this weekend. We've got some heavyweight matchups. We've got some excellent games. We've got Georgia, Tennessee. We've got South Florida, seeing if they're for real with Miami. We've got Florida, LSU, A&M, Notre Dame. So give me some games you're looking out for, and where can our listeners go find some good lines?
At BetOnline, as always go check out BetOnline for your best odds out there. The Texas A&M Notre Dame game is one that jumps out to me because Notre Dame, this is their season. With their remaining schedule and the fact that they don't play in a conference and have that sort of get-out-of-jail-free card with a conference championship, I think they have to get this win because if they lose this and run the table at 10-2, there aren't that many really impressive wins. So you would have to ask the question, well, who have you beaten? And maybe it's USC, but I don't know if that one win against a team that we're still not sure how good they're going to be is going to resonate. So I think that Notre Dame game becomes imperative that they win it. They already lost to Miami. How do they bounce back here as a round-to-touchdown favorite? I think that game is huge. And then the Florida Gators, I'm really curious to see how they do. How do they bounce back after that loss against LSU? I still think that there's just a massive overreaction. I think there's more parity. I think South Florida could be a really good football team where that loss isn't as abominable as people make it out to be. I still think the Florida Gators could cover that spread if their defense comes out and plays well, which I think they could against the LSU offensive line, which still has question marks. I need to see DJ Lagway, how he looks in that environment. But I think they'll try to run the football, be pretty committed to that. So I think that is a game. Anytime there's a game in Baton Rouge at night, it's worth tuning into to see how it turns out. So I like that game as well.
Danny, always a pleasure, my friend. I've appreciated your work for a long, long time. So thank you for the time and enjoy the games this weekend, okay?
Absolutely. You too, Spencer. Have a good one.
All right, my guy, Danny Cannell. Get him on Twitter at Danny Cannell is where you find him. You can check out betonline.ag for updated college football playoff, Heisman, and college football week 3 lines as Danny stops by to preview the week ahead. Yeah, some big matchups this week, some big-time blue blood ranked matchups this week after a lack of big-time matchups a week ago. Of course, Utah will be in Laramie to take on Wyoming. Want to remind you that kick is at 6 o'clock, but our pregame coverage with Porter, Trevor Riley, Zach Moss, a bunch of former Utes will stop by as well. That's going to begin at 2 o'clock on Saturday, 4 hours prior to kick, so make sure to set your alarm to tune into ESPN 700. TV coverage will be CBS Sports Network. Utah is a 22.5-point favorite at last check. BYU on a bye this week, and they're going to be back in action against East Carolina. All right, week 2 of the NFL gets going tomorrow. We've already had 3 weeks of college football. Have you run into an issue finding games? Well, you probably have the wrong TV setup. If you're a sports fan and you don't have Dish, you definitely have the wrong TV setup. Great promotions right now. Save a bunch of money, make the change. Good internet solutions as well. All you have to do is dial 801-424-DISH. What's going on, Ryan?
Spence, it was great having you out yesterday, and awesome opportunities for customers to call in, and it's still there though. The offer is fantastic, and we had so much success yesterday. Lots of customers calling in, taking advantage of this fantastic offer, and especially the internet options to be able to get out of that evil cable bundle. And I'm sorry I got to call it evil, but it's an unfortunate thing because they want to trap you into it, but there's a way out. And we have the ways. We now have more than 7 different internet providers here in the Salt Lake area. So there's lots of different options. And guys, we're going to add more. I've got a couple more people that we're about ready to add. I'll have a solution guaranteed no matter what if you call up for internet, and I'll get you a TV solution that's better than ever, especially with the promotion. Guys, you're going to get a 2-year promotion, 2 years worth of credits. It's guaranteed cheaper than what you're paying for DirecTV and cable. Dish is the way to go. Biggest DVR out there. Auto hops commercials. Auto records your local channels. So all those Saturday night, Sunday night, Monday night games just on your DVR. Call us up and upgrade, and we're going to throw in the NFL Red Zone free for 6 months with the multi-sports pack, Showtime and Paramount Plus free. Plus, I'm going to give you Dish's top package. It's their very, very top, over 300 channels free for the next 3 months. Great opportunity. It's just cash in your pocket. Call us up today. Take advantage of that. We'll throw in dinner at JCW's. Make sure you ask about internet solutions. Takes us a couple seconds. Type your address in. We'll know exactly what we can help you with. You just got to call us, 801-424-DISH. That's 424-3474.
All right, there he is, Ryan from the Dish Pros. We'll do a little RSL coming up. We'll get to know Johnny Russell, 5 o'clock hour of the program. Back to college football. We'll say goodnight at 6 o'clock on a Wednesday edition of The Drive. You are halfway through that work week, one day closer to the weekend. Keep it right here on ESPN 700. All right, we'll get back to some college football storylines on the program today during the final hour of the show. 5 o'clock hour comes your way in just a little bit. We'll say goodnight at 6. Halfway through your work week, one day closer to the weekend. Our local soccer team is actually playing a game. It's been a while, but Sporting Kansas City rolls into America First Field on Saturday for a 7:30 kick. Our next guest knows a thing or two about Sporting KC's, now with RSL. Pleased to welcome in Johnny Russell on a Wednesday afternoon. Johnny, happy Wednesday, sir. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm good, man. I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. I really, really appreciate the time. First of all, do you guys remember how to play? This is such a weird thing that late summer, early fall, you've had this much time off. On a serious note, my question is, what have you guys tried to utilize this time to get accomplished before you get back at it on Saturday?
I mean, it's a bit of a strange one having this kind of break at this period of the season, but I think there was a few things needed addressing from our part, a few things that we had probably got away from and we had let slip, and it's given us the time to work on that. You know, a lot of guys had, at this stage of the season, you're struggling with a couple of things, so it gave them a little bit of time as well. So the training sessions over the last 3 weeks have been really intense, very competitive, and I think that will set us up nicely leading into this game and then leading into the rest of the season as well.
Johnny, since this is the first time I've had an opportunity to interview you, you and I actually met in San Diego. It was just a passing in the night thing. I was able to say hello. I was up in the suite with John, but I have not had a chance to interview you in this space. So I wanted to go back to the origin story on how you landed here, because you were kind of without a club after playing for KC for quite some time, and we heard some rumors maybe Kurt was speaking with you and your reps. But tell us about the process that landed you here in Salt Lake and how your experience has been so far.
Yeah, it was a bit of a weird one, to be honest. I don't think anyone would have expected that move, especially if you've watched the MLS and the two teams playing over the last few years. I don't think anyone would have expected it. I think there was a little bit of early contact over the sort of Christmas period, but at that time, obviously, RSL were set. They didn't need anyone, and then obviously after that, lost a few players. And then I flew in probably 2 or 3 weeks before I actually signed. I came in to do just like a little tour of the facility, just a little like medical checkup type thing, and just a meeting with Kurt and Pablo just to sort of address everything, what their expectations were, what their goals were, and then similar from my point of view as well. And I think that went really well, and we had a Zoom call as well with Jason on that as well, and it just felt right. Obviously, I wanted to continue playing. I think there was maybe within the league there was a little bit of a misconception that I was finished after leaving Sporting, but that was not the case. I still wanted to continue playing. I still feel, although I'm obviously closer to the end of my career than the start, still feel that I've got so much left in me to give on the field and off the field. So after speaking to those guys, it was a fairly easy decision. Yeah, like I said at the start of that there, I think it caught everyone by surprise and no one kind of expected it.
How's your experience been? And also, what did you know about our market? What did you know about our city prior to coming here, and how's it been for you so far?
Not a huge deal about the city. It's obviously somewhere that I've came and played a lot, but sort of my knowledge and recollection of the city would be literally staying at the hotel downtown and driving to the stadium. That's all we got to see. So I was on the drive, you can see the mountains and you can see obviously how beautiful that is. But I think like Salt Lake in general is probably one of those cities where it maybe gets underappreciated by traveling teams, and getting to come here and see it firsthand. I've been up into the canyons a few times, been over to Park City, so I know how beautiful the place is. So before moving here, honestly, it's just that drive down the highway was really the only thing that I had seen.
And have you enjoyed yourself? Are you enjoying the experience? And what's it like playing for Pablo? What sort of coach has he been for you so far?
I've loved it. Like I said, they're getting on the off days that we do getting to go up and explore up into the mountains and playing some golf as well. The golf courses here are beautiful. Amazing backdrop when you've got the mountains behind you as well. And Pablo's been great. I think I knew that was going to be the case after we spoke in the Zoom. We spoke face to face. Just a real sort of players manager. Having he's not long out the game playing himself, so I think that definitely helps. But he's been great with me. I told him how important it was for me to obviously continue playing. And he's given me the opportunity to come and do that. So no, I'm hugely grateful to him, and owe him a lot.
All right, Johnny, you just opened a door. I did not know you played golf. I could talk to you about golf for hours, but you're from the home of golf. Yeah, I mean, did you play?
Yes.
Did you play as a child, or is this a new hobby of yours?
No, I played a little bit as a child. My dad was actually a really good scratch golfer, but I didn't play too much with him. And it was just kind of something I played with my friends on and off. And then throughout my time in Scotland and England, it was kind of on and off. And then really the most golf I've played is when I moved to the US. I think the weather helps as well. So it's definitely something I'd say over the last, it's always been a huge interest and love of mine, but became more of a hobby the last few years, where I've got to play a lot more than I had done previously.
May I ask your handicap? Do you have an index?
I haven't updated it for a while. On the off season, I was playing a lot of golf when I was without a team, and it actually helped my golf game hugely. And I got it down to just under 10. So
nice.
But it will definitely be back up from then. I've played a few times since with a few of the guys here, and it's definitely not at the level it was.
It's a hard game, Johnny, as you know. Hey, let me move over here. Again, it's been such a weird time for you guys to have so much time off during this portion of the calendar. But we had Pablo on last week, so it does allow you to get Victor Olatunji and Rowan Cruz kind of ingratiated into the group. Also, DeAndre Yedlin was brought in addition to that. So tell me your impressions of the 3 late summer additions you guys made, and how's it been in training this week watching them?
It's been great, and with any new addition, I know it from being one myself earlier in the season, how welcoming the guys are here, and then even my time in KC, especially towards the end, being the captain, how important it is to get those guys feeling comfortable in the environment as quickly as possible. You don't want guys to feel out of place and it affects their game because they're not confident. They don't want to express themselves, and because they don't want to make any mistakes or put a foot wrong. And just to ingrain them very quickly that we're all going to make mistakes, but I think getting to know them and getting them involved in a social and a personal way definitely helps to bring out the best of them on the field as well. So it's been good from that sense, where we've had a lot of time where we can get to know these guys and better, and I think you'll see the best of them now that they've had a little bit more time to work on getting used to the way that we play. The fitness levels are getting up there as well, so I think you'll definitely start to see the best of those guys, and that's only going to be good for us going forward.
I wanted to ask you about Diego. You've played with a lot of really special players over the years, and, Diego's spent some time with the U.S. men's national team. I believe he'll be with you guys on Saturday, but How good do you think he can be once it's fully baked? And what's it been like to kind of witness the type of player he is so far since you landed in Salt Lake?
I think he's got everything to be a top player. I think you've seen how important he was for us, especially in the earlier part of the season. I feel like we were relying on him heavily, and just him. It was him and Rafa that have kind of kept us in a lot of games. And he's still young. He's still got so much to learn. He's still got so much growth in his game. But I think you can see just the raw talent that he's got, and not only that, but his desire to work off the ball, his desire see every day to get better, and he's such a great guy as well. He's maybe one of those figures where, from the outside, you can maybe draw your own assumptions of him, but honestly, such a great guy, and he was one of the main things I was really looking forward to coming here for, is to play with him. I'd played against him the last couple of years, and you could see the progression from the outside for me. But now to get to see it every day, it's not luck. I see how much that he puts into his game. He's constantly working on what you would put him and his game, driving at people, taking people on, creating stuff. That's not by accident. He works on that every single day, and that's great to see. Especially, it can be easy, someone with that talent to not put the work in, but watching him put the work in is even more pleasing to see when he gets the credit that I feel he fully deserves.
Well, Johnny, I appreciate the time, man. It's been fun to get to know you. Welcome to our market, even though it's been a few months, and best of luck on Saturday against your old club, okay?
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, Johnny Russell, RSL back in action after a long break. They're going to take on Sporting KC coming up at 7:30 on Saturday at America First Field. I want to tell you about my friends at Advanced Window Products, where you can get $2,500 off when you buy 10 windows or more. It's a local company operated by our guy, Nate Orcher, Jake Weber. They were in studio last week. Great people here to help you. So if you need windows right now, give them a call because you're going to save $2,500 when you buy 10 windows or more. But definitely do it before the weather gets cold, because if your house is cold during the winter, you're jacking up that heating bill, probably because you need new windows. So here's the number, 801-850-9100, 801-850-9100. That's 801-850-9100, or visit advancedwindows.com. Before we catch a break, Ryan from the Dish Professionals, get all the games, man. If you have a issue finding games for college or pro football, you definitely don't have Dish. If you're a sports fan, you got to get it. Take advantage of the promotion. Save money on internet by dialing 801-424-DISH. What's going on, Ryan?
This is a tough day, and I'm going to take my moment just to say, my deepest condolences to Charlie Kirk and his family. And I am deeply saddened, and this is an unfortunate event, especially in our beautiful state with our beautiful people. And I just want everybody to know how sad this is and how much it bothers me. And I appreciate all the support we've had as a retailer and been on the radio for all these years. And I hope that everybody goes home and hugs their family and kisses their kids, because this is a sad day for us. And that's all I want to say today, and I appreciate it. And you guys have a good night.
All right, Ryan from the Dish Pros, 801-424-DISH. We'll catch a break. Final hour of the show is next on ESPN 700. All right, final segment of the program on a Wednesday afternoon. Halfway through that work week and one day closer to the weekend. So happy Wednesday to you. Lively show today. It has been a very sad day here across the landscape of our market as Charlie Kirk, who was in town speaking at UVU, has been shot and killed. According to the AP, a suspect is in custody. I am a sports talk radio host. I am not the guy to comment on this. I'm not qualified for it. Political violence is contagious. The foundation of a free society is the ability to participate in it without fear of violence. And this is happening way too much across the spectrum. I'm very sad. My son is a UVU alum. I know some of his friends were in attendance. So all I'll say is Charlie Kirk was a father and a husband with 2 children. And I hope we can find some way to get in front of this stuff. I don't have any answers. It's just sad, and I feel sad that it happened here. So I hope everybody down there is safe, and we'll be thinking of you and sending best thoughts and prayers your way. All right, Porter, before we get out of here, what comes our way on a Thursday edition of the show?
Yes, Spence, on a Thursday edition of the program, we'll continue to preview Utah at Wyoming, the number 20 Utes in Laramie over the weekend. Sam Bruckhouse for his weekly hit with our friends at Sumer Sports. We'll chat with one Kyle Bonagura, talking Big 12, talking college football, maybe some soccer as well with Kyle. Max Chadwick joins the program, as does our friend Amy Donaldson. A good day, probably, to chat with Amy.
For sure. Special thank you today, Richard Smith, Bill Riley, Danny Cannell, and Johnny Russell. For any of the sound you may have missed from the show today, the website is ESPN700sports.com. Make sure to download our mobile app and take us on the go. App Store, Google Play Store. Support our podcast. It's called The Drive with Spence Checketts with a good rating and a review. We would appreciate it. He's Porter. I'm Spence. Hug your loved ones. We'll talk to you on a Thursday show. As always, you can find it right here on ESPN 700.